Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr. X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Tonight's story is taken from a strange manuscript that surfaced anonymously on a conspiracy forum back in 2019. No one knows who wrote it, but those who've read it really read it say the technical details, the historical accuracy, and the tone suggest it came from someone deep inside the military world. Someone who knew things they weren't supposed to. The document had no preamble, no dedication, just a title scratched across the front in fading ink. What we hid up there. A technician's account of Operation Fishbowl, 1962. What follows is presented as is. Whether it's fact or fiction, I'll leave that to you. Just know this. Sometimes the truth sounds insane. And sometimes fiction is just the truth no one's brave enough to say out loud. So get comfortable. Turn down the lights and come with me to a lonely strip of land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The year is 1962. A young radar technician named David Rowe steps into a classified world so secret, so strange, it would haunt him for the rest of his life. Manuscript of David Rowe recovered from unclassified archives, 1962 to 1963. My name is David Rowe. And if you're reading this, I'm probably already dead or disappeared. Either way, it means my niece found the compartment I built into the wall behind my old workbench, just like I told her to. If I ever went missing, I'm writing this in late 1987. It's been 25 years since the events I'm about to describe, and still, I wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, my ears ringing with that low, bone-deep hum. The same one that blanketed Johnston Atoll like a living thing. Was 28 in 1962. Just a regular radar and telemetry guy with the U.S. Air Force, stationed at Vandenberg AFB in California. I had top secret clearance, sure, but mostly I tracked test missiles and filed routine reports. Nothing extraordinary. Until that Tuesday in June. Colonel Morrison summoned me to his office without explanation. I remember walking in and seeing him hunched over a manila folder, the kind stamped with more red ink than I thought legally possible. He didn't even look up. Rowe. He muttered. Double quote, sir, I said, waiting. Without lifting his eyes, he asked, "How's your family situation?" The question threw me off. "Excuse me?" He finally looked up. His face was pale and drawn, like he hadn't slept in days. "You got a wife, kids, girlfriend? Anyone who'd miss you if you vanished for a while?" I shifted in my seat. "No, sir. Divorced last year. No kids." "Good." He pushed the folder toward me. "New orders. Read it. Memorize it. Burn it. You leave tomorrow at 0600. Inside the folder was a single sheet. That's it. Just one. No names, no contact details. Just this. Location: Johnston Atoll. Pacific Ocean Grid reference. Classified operation name: Dominic. Subproject: glass curtain assignment duration: indefinite role. Atmospheric radiation telemetry calibration. Specialist. I stared at it, confused. Double quote, sir. What exactly is atmospheric radiation telemetry calibration? Colonel Morrison's jaw tightened. "You'll find out when you get there." There was a pause. Then he added quietly, "Whatever you see, whatever you think you understand, you don't. Keep your head down and your mouth shut. That's how you survive." "Yes, sir," I replied, though I was anything but sure. "One more thing," he said, opening a drawer. He pulled out a small black box with a dial and a faint green LED. It looked like some kind of Geiger counter, but smaller. "This is a dimeter. You wear it at all times. If it starts clicking, find cover." If it starts screaming, ... pray. The flight took 14 hours. First to Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii for refueling, then a long stretch west, across empty ocean. I was the only passenger on the military transport, and the crew avoided me like I was radioactive. They barely spoke. The only interaction came when a sergeant handed me a boxed meal. It tasted like old crackers and depression. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. My mind kept circling the same questions. What was Operation Glass Curtain? Why me? And why all the secrecy? By the time the pilot announced we were approaching Johnston Atoll, I was glued to the window. The island looked like a joke. 2 miles long, maybe half a mile wide. A flat slab of sand and runway surrounded by endless blue. There were some low buildings, antenna arrays, and radar dishes, but mostly it looked like a forgotten speck in the middle of the ocean. A place the world had erased. The moment I stepped off the plane, it hit me, not just the heat, which was brutal, but something else. A taste in the air, metallic, like you'd bitten your tongue. My teeth started to ache, and there was a faint vibration under my boots, so subtle I might have imagined it. Except it never stopped. It was like the whole island was humming. Nowhere and everywhere at once. That's how it felt on Johnston Atoll. The dimeter on my belt clicked every so often. A slow, deliberate rhythm. I told myself it was normal, just background radiation. Nothing to panic over. I'd barely taken 10 steps off the transport plane when a tall, gaunt man in civilian clothes approached. He extended a hand that was cold and dry like old paper. "Mr. Rowe, I presume," he said with a clipped British accent. "Dr. Reginald Hawthorne. I'm the project director for Glass Curtain. Welcome to Johnston Atoll." He looked like someone who hadn't seen sunlight in years. Pale skin, silvery gray hair that didn't match his age, and eyes as hollow as Colonel Morrison's had been. He motioned toward a nearby military jeep. "I trust your flight was ... bearable?" "As much as 14 hours over open ocean can be," I said, climbing in. "But I have to be honest, I'm still not exactly sure what I'm doing here." He glanced over his shoulder, checking the area before speaking. Even out here, hundreds of miles from anywhere, he seemed paranoid. His voice dropped just above a whisper. "Your job, Mr. Rowe, is to ensure our atmospheric data is accurate during the upcoming tests. We're studying the effects of high-altitude nuclear detonations on the upper layers of the atmosphere." I blinked. "Nuclear detonations? Correct," he said calmly. "We're going to be setting off atomic bombs in the sky. Very high in the sky." As we drove across the flat stretch of sand and concrete, a strange sense of unease crept over me. Something wasn't right, not just with the mission, but the entire place. First, the number of people. I'd expected a few dozen personnel for a classified science post, maybe 100. But there had to be well over 1,000 people on the way. Island, soldiers, technicians, scientists. Way more than made sense. Second, the equipment. Massive radar arrays pointed straight into the sky like silver sunflowers. Thick cables snaked across the ground, connecting to machines I didn't recognize. Some looked like generators, others like industrial ovens. One reminded me of a huge tuning fork. Everything buzzed, faint, low-frequency noise you could feel in your molars. And then there was the hangar. It was a beast. Easily the largest structure on the island. Maybe the size of a football field. No windows. No markings. Just a massive matte black slab of metal surrounded by 2 layers of fencing topped with razor wire. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their uniforms bare of any insignia I could recognize. "What's in the hangar?" I asked, watching a pair of guards as we passed. Dr. Hawthorne's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "That's not your concern, Mr. Rowe. Your job is telemetry calibration. Focus on that." My quarters were inside a Quonset hut curved metal shell, stifling heat. I shared it with 3 others, Bobby Chun, an electronic specialist from San Francisco. Quiet, nervous energy. Always fiddling with circuits. Marcus Webb, a tough-looking army photographer from the Signal Corps who rarely smiled but always listened. And Dr. James Kellerman, a physicist from the University of Chicago who'd been working on secret military contracts since the Manhattan Project. That first night, we sat around a dented card table, playing poker with a deck missing the queen of hearts and sipping warm beer from rusted cans. Outside, the wind howled over the ocean like it was carrying secrets in from the deep. So, I asked, trying to sound casual as I tossed 2 cards down, what exactly are we testing out here? Bobby and Marcus exchanged a glance. It was the kind of look that said, how much should we say? Officially? Bobby said, lighting a cigarette. We're studying how high-altitude nukes affect radio signals and satellite systems. You know, science stuff. And unofficially? I asked. Dr. Kellerman didn't even look up from his hand. Unofficially, he said. We're trying to break something. I frowned. Break what? He finally looked at me. His eyes were pale blue and absolutely serious. Have you ever heard of the firmament, Mr. Rowe? I shook my head slowly. It's in Genesis, he said, setting his cards down. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above it. Most people think it's just poetic nonsense. But some people upstairs, they think it might be ... literal. You're saying there's a barrier above the earth? I'm saying, Kellerman replied, carefully choosing his words, there are layers to our atmosphere that don't behave like we think they should. Things that don't show up in the textbooks. And now we're going to see what happens when you slam an atomic bomb into them. The next morning, at exactly 0500, the entire base jolted awake to the sound of the loudspeakers crackling to life. All personnel. This is a drill. This is a drill. Code glass curtain is now in effect. Report to your assigned stations immediately. Do not look at the sky. Repeat. Do not look at the sky. My heart was pounding before I even reached for my boots. I dressed in a flash and sprinted to the telemetry station. Dr. Hawthorne was already there, surrounded by blinking consoles and buzzing meters. He didn't look up as I entered, just pointed to a panel and barked something about calibration. Is this really just a drill? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. No, he said, not missing a beat. The real tests. In 3 days. This is just to make sure people know what to do when the sky starts falling. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. Not yet. Over the next 3 days, I learned more than I ever wanted to about Operation Fishbowl. The mission was simple on paper. Detonate a 1.4 megaton nuclear warhead 250 miles above Earth's surface, higher than any weapon had ever been tested before. The official explanation was that it was a study to observe how high-altitude nuclear blasts affected radio communications and to explore whether nukes could be used to disable enemy satellites. But the more I listened in on the hushed conversations between scientists and military brass, the more I realized something didn't add up. They kept using terms I had never heard in connection with nuclear testing. Vertical containment analysis, atmospheric penetration studies, barrier resistance, firmament interaction protocols. It wasn't just technical jargon. It sounded like they were testing boundaries that weren't supposed to be crossed. What unnerved me most was their obsession with the sky. Every person on Johnston Atoll had been given strict instructions. Under no circumstances were we to look up during the detonation. They told us the flash would be so bright it could burn through closed eyelids and cause instant, permanent blindness. But the way they emphasized it, it felt like blindness wasn't the real concern. That was just the excuse. On the morning of July 9th, Dr. Hawthorne pulled me aside outside the telemetry bunker. He was the project director, tall, pale, graying early from years under fluorescent lab lights. His voice was low and deliberate. Whatever you do, he said, tightening the strap on his radiation badge. Don't look up. Not during the detonation, and not for 10 minutes after. Keep your eyes on your instruments. Keep your mind on your job. And if you hear anything from above, ignore it. I blinked at him. What kind of sounds? He stared at me for a moment too long. The kind that don't belong in our world. That was all he said before walking off. July 9th, 1962, a Tuesday. The sun rose over Johnston Atoll at 0630, painting the sky a sickly rust red like dried blood. Long shadows stretched across the cracked concrete runways. The air already felt heavy, wrong somehow. I'd been up since 0400, recalibrating the Choin telemetry equipment and trying not to puke from the knot in my stomach. I'd been nervous before other tests, but this felt different, like something bigger was coming. The detonation was scheduled for 900 at 0800. We received the order, all personnel to report to assigned stations. Mine was the main telemetry. Bunker, an underground concrete dome tucked into a low hill on the island's northern end. No windows. Just thick walls and the dull green glow of radar screens and flickering indicator lights. Inside with me were Dr. Hawthorne, Bobby Chun, and two technicians I barely knew. Everyone wore standard issue radiation badges. But Hawthorne had something extra clipped to his belt, something that looked like a Geiger counter, but bulkier, covered in unfamiliar dials and glowing gauges I didn't recognize. All right, gentlemen, he said, hands clasped behind his back. His voice sounded forced, like he was trying too hard to be calm. To minus 10 minutes. You all know your roles. Eyes on your instruments. Record everything. And remember, do not look up. At T-minus 5 minutes, the bunker's radio crackled to life. Glass curtain control to all stations. Starfish Prime is go for detonation. All personnel confirm sealed status. One by one, the confirmations came in. Telemetry Station Alpha sealed and ready. Photography Station Bravo sealed and ready. Atmospheric Monitoring Station Charlie sealed and ready. The voices were flat, hollow. I turned back to my display, watching the soft, rhythmic sweep of the radar and the slow flutter of atmospheric pressure readings. Everything looked normal. Everything was quiet. Tingle minus 60 seconds. I felt my chest tighten. Sweat dripped down my back. T minus 30 seconds. My fingers trembled as I adjusted a dial, pretending like it mattered. T minus 10, 9, 8. The rest of the countdown passed only in my mind. 3, 2, 1. At exactly 0900 hours, the world broke. Even deep inside the bunker, behind feet of concrete and steel, even with my eyes locked on glowing instruments, I saw the flash dot. It wasn't like seeing a light. It was like something lit up inside my skull, a blinding white brilliance that came from everywhere and nowhere, like God himself had opened his eyes for the first time in eons. The dosimeter on my belt began ticking furiously. Then it stopped, ticking altogether, and let out a high-pitched whine, long and steady, like a dying scream. It made my teeth vibrate in my jaw. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the vision. For 3, maybe 4 seconds, I forgot who I was. I wasn't in the bunker. I wasn't on the island. I wasn't David Rock, radar tech with the U.S. Air Force. I was somewhere else, floating in silence. Alone in space, looking down on Earth from an impossible height. The planet looked small, fragile, like something you could shatter with a whisper, and I could see something. Something moving beyond the veil of atmosphere, just outside the visible spectrum. Shapes, patterns, things that shouldn't have been there. A faint voice snapped me back. Jesus Christ. Bobby Chun whispered, "Look at the radar." My vision blurred. My heart was pounding like a drum in my ears. I turned slowly to the screen. What I saw didn't make sense. It wasn't just the atmospheric disturbances or electromagnetic spikes, those we expected. It was shadows on the radar. Not planes, not birds, not weather anomalies. These things were above the explosion, well beyond the edge of our ionosphere. And they were moving fast, deliberate, intelligent. I wiped my eyes, praying it was just afterimage blindness, some kind of optical illusion. But the radar kept painting them, frame after frame, approaching in erratic but purposeful paths. "Something's up there," Bobby said, voice shaking. "Something's up there, and it saw us." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stared. At the screen, my breath caught in my throat. And then, we heard it, faint through the bunker walls. Distant, but growing louder. A hum low, layered, almost like a chorus, but not human. Not natural. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from above. Focused on the radar display, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was all wrong. Normally, the screen would show a smooth arc, the curvature of the Earth, with occasional radar blips from aircraft or weather balloons. But now, it looked like the ocean during a storm. Concentric circles, rippling outward. From a point directly above us, not below. Not along the horizon. Above. It looked like a pond after a stone's been dropped in, but in reverse. The ripples didn't spread and fade. They kept bouncing back, echoing as if they'd hit something. Solid up there. A barrier. What the hell is this? I muttered. Dr. Hawthorne stepped in closer, eyes locked on the radar. "Are you getting this?" His voice was taut somewhere between awe and terror. "Yes, sir," I replied. "But I don't understand what I'm looking at." "None of us do," he said quietly. "Just keep recording." The radio crackled with static, then a garbled voice cut through. "All stations, this is glass curtain control. We have confirmation successful detonation. At 250-mile altitude. Initial radiation levels are within expected parameters. Atmospheric disturbance is," the voice hesitated, "significant." Significant didn't cover it. Every instrument in the bunker was going haywire. The magnetic field sensors fluctuated violently, bouncing between readings that didn't make physical sense. 1 second they were flat, the next they were spiking into impossible ranges. The atmospheric pressure monitors registered sharp dips and sudden rises, as if the very air around us was pulsing. Vibrating. Radio communications collapsed entirely. Even the most secure military frequencies were drowning in static. We could barely hear control through the noise. Then came the sound. It started 5 minutes after the detonation. At first, I thought it was just my ears ringing, but no. This was something else. A low-frequency hum, almost subsonic. You didn't so much hear it as feel it. It came from above, definitely above, and it was steady, like the deep resonance of a massive engine. I felt it in my chest, like someone was pressing a hand against my sternum and pushing harder by the second. "Do you hear that?" I asked, looking over at Hawthorne. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, we heard it during the test runs too. It usually stops after about an hour. What causes it?" He didn't answer right away. "We're not sure," he said at last. "But we have theories." He didn't elaborate. The hum continued for exactly 57 minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. It felt like the entire world had hit pause, like something was watching, waiting for us to make the next move. Reports started trickling in not long after. Across the Pacific, radio communications were jammed or down completely. Australia lost contact with its eastern seaboard for over 2 hours. Several satellites stopped transmitting altogether. Some spun out of orbit. And then came the visual anomalies. Aurora-like lights were seen as far south as Samoa, thousands of miles from where they should have been visible. Civilian aircraft reported strange visual disturbances at cruising altitude, but the strangest were the so-called crack sightings. 3 pilots, all in different aircraft, described the same thing: a dark fissure in the sky, Not a cloud, not a contrail. A line, black, unnatural, stretching from one edge of the horizon to the other, like someone had drawn a stroke across the sky with charcoal. It remained visible for several minutes before slowly dissolving. When I brought it up with Dr. Hawthorne later, he barely looked at me. Optical illusions, he said flatly. The EMP from the blast can disrupt neural signals, causes temporary vision disturbances. But I could tell by his eyes he didn't believe a word of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back there floating, weightless, looking down at Earth, seeing those impossible shapes in the distance. Shapes that didn't move like satellites or debris. Shapes that watched. I kept trying to grasp the memory, to hold it still and make sense of it, but it was like trying to catch smoke. The more I focused, the more it slipped through my fingers. Around 0300 hours, I gave up. I pulled on my jacket and stepped out of the bunker, walking alone through the dim, moonlit paths of the island. For the first time since arriving at Johnston Atoll, I let myself look up Dot, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The stars were wrong. I've loved astronomy since I was a boy. I know the constellations like most people know street signs. But now, Orion was tilted at a bizarre angle, like someone had tried to rotate the sky itself. The Big Dipper looked warped, stretched, bent out of its normal shape. And then there were stars I didn't recognize. Bright, aggressive points of light twinkling in parts of the sky that should have been empty. I stood there, neck craned back, heart pounding in my throat. I told myself I was imagining things. That the radiation, the shock, the stress, it was all getting to me. That my perception was off, but the longer I stared, the more certain I became. Something had changed. The sky over Johnston Atoll wasn't ours anymore. That's when I heard the footsteps. I noticed Marcus Webb, our assigned photographer, standing about 50 yards away near the eastern edge of the compound. He was setting up a large, unfamiliar-looking camera on a heavy-duty tripod, carefully angling it straight up toward the sky. He moved with the calm, precise manner of someone who'd done this 100 times before. His eyes were hidden behind thick, dark-tinted glasses, and even from a distance, I could tell he was deeply focused on what he was doing. Curious and wide awake, I walked over to him. "Working late?" He jumped, startled. "Jesus, Dave, you scared the crap out of me." "Sorry," I said, raising my hands. "Couldn't sleep either." He nodded slowly, rubbing his jaw. "Yeah, something like that." I glanced at the odd-looking camera rig, that for stargazing or something. Marcus looked hesitant but gestured at the equipment. Dr. Hawthorne asked me to take some night sky photos. Atmospheric monitoring, supposed to be routine. "At 3 in the morning?" I asked, raising a brow. "Best time for it, apparently," he said. "Less interference from ground level. Heat and noise, cleaner data." I leaned closer to get a better look at the camera. It didn't look anything like our standard issue military tech. It had multiple filters and strange lens attachments, like it was built to capture light we couldn't even see. "Mind if I ask what exactly you're looking for?" He hesitated again, then exhaled. "Officially? Aurora activity. Residual electromagnetic effects from the Starfish Prime detonation. You know, pretty light shows." "And unofficially?" I asked, lowering my voice. Marcus glanced around, then stepped closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Unofficially, we're looking for cracks." "Cracks?" "In whatever we hit up there." The words sent a chill crawling down my spine. But Marcus just turned back to the camera and adjusted the focus like he hadn't said anything unusual. The next few days on Johnston Atoll were unlike anything I'd ever experienced in my military career. The Starfish Prime detonation had been expected to generate some electromagnetic disturbances, but what actually happened went far beyond anything anyone had prepared for. The island became a hive of activity scientists, techs, officers, all scrambling to analyze the strange data, streaming in from every instrument on base. The first major sign that something was off? Communications, even a full week after the detonation. Long-range radio remained unreliable. Signals bounced unpredictably, distorted or lost altogether. It was like something in the upper atmosphere was blocking or twisting them, something that wasn't supposed to be there. Ships out at sea reported navigational issues, and at least 3 aircraft were forced to make emergency landings when their onboard systems malfunctioned without warning. But the worst part? That was just the beginning. On July 12th, 3 days after the blast, the first reports came in. Dead birds. Dozens of them, floating lifelessly in the lagoon. Wings spread, bodies limp. No sign of struggle, no wounds, no blood. I watched as the base veterinarian, Dr. Worth, examined them under the sterile white lights of the med tent. No disease, he muttered, scribbling notes. No trauma either. Organs are intact. They just dropped, like they died mid-flight, I said. He nodded. Probably confused by the EMP, disrupted their navigation. Birds use the magnetic field to orient themselves. Detonation must have scrambled their sense of direction. But that explanation didn't sit right with me. I've seen disoriented birds before. They flap around in circles. They crash into buildings. These ones hadn't spiraled out or wandered off course. They just stopped. Like a switch had been flipped dead before they hit the ground. The next morning, we got a report from a Navy patrol vessel about 50 miles south of the island. Their radar was showing something. Strange, something big. A solid object. Stationary. Hovering 200 meters above Earth's surface. Circular. Massive. Atmospheric anomaly. Dr. Hawthorne said, when I confronted him later, layer of ionized particles from the detonation. Reflecting radar signals. Nothing to worry about, it'll dissipate. But at DIDN single quotes T. In fact, the signal got stronger. More defined. By July 15th, radar stations as far away as Hawaii were picking up the same thing. A circular structure, hundreds of miles wide, hovering above the central Pacific. Completely invisible to the naked eye, but undeniably present on every radar display. And then, things got really strange. The morning of July 16th, I was running a routine calibration on the telemetry equipment when I noticed something unusual on the radar screen. It wasn't just the usual sweep across the curve of the Earth. No distant aircraft. No weather systems. Instead, the screen was showing a grid. Not noise, an actual pattern. A geometric one. Lines straight, precise, intersecting, and forming a massive hexagonal framework that pulsed faintly as if alive. At first, I thought it was interference from lingering ionization. But the pattern didn't change. I adjusted the gain, switched frequencies, rebooted the system. Still there. It wasn't static. It was deliberate. Hey Bobby, I called over my shoulder to Chun, who was hunched over the comms gear nearby. You got a second? He walked over, rubbing his eyes. What's up? I pointed to the screen. Tell me what you're seeing. He squinted, then leaned closer. What the hell is that? I was hoping you could tell me. We both stared at the display, silent, as the grid slowly shifted and pulsed in a rhythm that felt coordinated, like something was watching, or waiting. It was beautiful in a way, almost hypnotic. That hexagonal grid on the radar screen shimmered in soft green, like a piece of abstract art rendered in electronic light. It pulsed faintly, symmetrical and deliberate, like something intelligent had etched it into the sky itself. But the longer I looked at it, the more unsettled I felt. It wasn't just the beauty, it was what it implied. There was something up there. Something not natural. Something built. Should we report this? Bobby asked, voice low. Before I could answer, Dr. Hawthorne appeared behind us without a sound. Report what? He said. I pointed to the radar display. This pattern, it's been up there for the past 20 minutes. Dr. Hawthorne stepped forward and leaned in. The moment he saw it, The color drained from his face. "Turn it off," he said sharply. I blinked. "Sir?" "Turn off the radar, now." I hesitated. "Is there a malfunction in the system?" "There's a problem with what you're seeing," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Now please turn it off." I reached over and flipped the power switch. The radar screen blinked off, and the geometric grid vanished. Hawthorne stood staring at the blank screen for a few seconds. Then he turned toward us. His face looked older in that moment, drawn, strained, like he'd been carrying a weight no one else could see. "Gentlemen," he said slowly, "I need to know I can trust you." We nodded, unsure of where this was going. "What you just saw is classified at the highest possible level. You will not speak of it. Not to anyone, not in your reports, not even to each other, and you will not dwell on it. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Bobby replied quickly. "Sir," I said, still trying to make sense of what had just happened, "what exactly was that?" Hawthorne didn't answer right away. He looked past us for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to. "Tell us the truth. Something that shouldn't exist," he said quietly. "Something that's always been there. But we only learned how to see it when we hit it hard enough." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling. The shape of that hexagonal pattern burned into the back of my mind. It felt familiar somehow, but I couldn't place it. Like a half-remembered dream from childhood. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that Operation Fishbowl wasn't what we were told it was. Officially, we were studying the effects of high-altitude nuclear detonations on communications and satellites. But nothing about this assignment made sense. Not the hardware, not the scientists, not the secrecy. And now I was sure of one thing. They weren't just studying the sky. They were looking for something they had found. Around 0200 hours, I gave up trying to sleep. I had to know more. Quietly, I slipped out of bed, pulled on my boots, and left the barracks. I moved across the island in darkness, sticking to the shadows and out of the light. I'd memorized the patrol patterns over the past week-old habits. From my early years in service, my target was the restricted hangar on the southern end of the island. It was surrounded by 2 fences topped with razor wire and guarded by sentries who looked like they'd shoot first and ask later. I'd snuck through tighter security before. Near the back of the hangar, a drainage ditch ran close to the fence. It was shallow, filled with foul, stagnant water, and it stank like sewage, but it provided cover. I crawled on my belly through the muck, ignoring the stench, until I reached a narrow gap in the inner fence. From there, I could see the building's rear wall specifically. A small window near the back entrance. I raised myself up just enough to peer through it. What I saw inside made me forget all about the filth. I was crawling through. The hangar was filled with camera equipment, more than I'd ever seen in one place. But these weren't military cameras. These were scientific instruments, massive telescopes, spectrometers, lens arrays, and machines I couldn't even begin to name. They looked like they belonged in a physics lab, not on a remote Pacific island. Then I noticed the walls. Every inch of the hangar's interior was plastered with photographs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all arranged in a meticulous grid. Each photo captured the same section of sky above Johnston Atoll, but they weren't ordinary sky photos. These images revealed something the naked eye couldn't see. Lines, structures, grids, a latticework of geometry woven across the upper atmosphere. Hexagons perfectly aligned, stretching out into a vast 3-dimensional pattern. And cutting through those lines, in several of the images, were dark fractures. Cracks. Thin, at first barely visible. But in some of the more recent photos, the cracks had widened. And through those gaps, there wasn't just empty sky. There was something else. Something darker than night. It wasn't the blackness of space, it was a kind of absence. A wrongness that pulled at the edges of your mind. Like looking through a hole in reality itself. I stared at those photos, transfixed. My brain refused to accept what I was seeing, but my eyes wouldn't look away. And then I spotted it small, barely noticeable, a label on one of the metal filing cabinets near the wall. Firmament reaction event Prism 6. The words meant nothing to me. And yet they terrified me more than anything I'd seen that night. Firmam. There. It was again that word. The barrier between the waters above and the waters below. The ceiling of the world. I was about to inch closer to the window of the hangar when the sound of footsteps made me freeze. I dropped to the bottom of the ditch, pressed myself flat against the earth, and held my breath. 2 guards walked by, their heavy boots crunching the gravel that lined the perimeter path. Still can't believe what we're seeing in those photos. One of them muttered. Believe it, the other said. I've been here since the first test back in April. Every time we hit it, it gets a little weaker. And every time it weakens, we see a little more of what's on the other side. What do you think is over there? I don't know, the guard said quietly. And honestly, I don't want to know. But I'll tell you this much, it's been watching us for a long time. And now that we've cracked the shell, it's watching more closely. Their voices faded as they continued their patrol, and I stayed down until I was sure they were gone. Even then, I waited 10 more minutes before creeping back toward my quarters in the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind kept circling back to what I had seen in the hangar, and what the guards had said. We weren't just testing nuclear weapons. We were attacking something ancient, something immense, something that had either been shielding us or imprisoning us, or maybe both. And every time we set off another bomb, we weren't just poking at it, we were breaking it. The terrifying question that haunted me was this: what would happen when it finally broke? I didn't have to wait long to find out. It was July 18th, just 9 days after the Starfish Prime detonation. I was yanked from sleep at 04:03 by a siren. Not the usual alert, the one we were all used to. This was something else. It sounded wrong, discordant, like metal being torn apart underwater. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere at once. I threw on my uniform and ran outside, heart pounding. I expected to see fire, smoke, some kind of catastrophe. But what I found instead stopped me cold. Every single person on base was gathered in the main compound, all staring silently at the sky. Their faces were blank with confusion, awe, and fear. The aurora was back, but this wasn't like the shimmering curtain of colors we'd seen after the Starfish detonation. No, this was something else entirely. The sky above Johnston Atoll glowed, with colors that shouldn't have existed: deep violet, searing emerald, shades of cyan that seemed to burn. They pulsed, alive, with an energy I couldn't describe. Within the glow, I could see shapes, geometric, shifting patterns that moved like they were alive, like they were thinking. Beautiful, isn't it? Dr. Hawthorne had appeared beside me. His arms were crossed tightly across his chest. His voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. They darted around the sky with unease. What's causing this? I asked, not taking my eyes off the display above. Secondary effects from the detonation, he said. The EMP disturbed the magnetic field lines. This is just the energy finding its way back to equilibrium. But I could hear the doubt in his voice. Even he didn't believe what he was saying. The aurora wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was too symmetrical, too deliberate. It looked like a message. Dr. Hawthorne, I said carefully, what are we really doing here? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he finally spoke, his voice low. We're explorers, Mr. Rock. We're trying to understand the true nature of the world we live in. And sometimes that means pushing past boundaries that were never meant to be crossed. I looked at him. And if we push too hard, then, he said quietly, we find out what's been waiting for us on the other side. The aurora lasted for 3 hours. Then, just like that, It vanished, flickered out like someone had flipped a cosmic switch. But the feeling didn't go away. That whole day, the air felt wrong, charged, tense, like the silence after a scream. People started reporting strange things, the sensation of being watched, unexplained static in their radios, flickers of motion at the edge of their vision. Some described a low hum that seemed to follow them, always just at the edge of hearing. But the worst came from Dr. Kellerman. He was one of the senior physicists that even worked on the original Manhattan Project. That morning, he claimed he'd seen shapes in the aurora, humanoid silhouettes hovering in the light, watching the island from above, silent, still. When I asked Dr. Hawthorne about it, he brushed it off. Pareidolia, he said. Our brains are wired to see patterns. Stress plays tricks on us. Hallucinations are common in situations like this. But I'd seen Kellerman that morning, seen the look in his eyes. That wasn't a man struggling with hallucinations. That was a man whose entire understanding of reality had just cracked down the middle. Later that afternoon, I was in the telemetry station when Bobby Chun came flying through the door. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic and disbelief. "Dave," he gasped, "you need to see this now." The communications room was dim, lit only by the soft flickering glow of the equipment panels. Bobby stood by the main console, his face tense, his headphones pressed tight against his ears. As I stepped inside, the room was filled with static, low and constant, like a distant wind scraping across metal. But under the interference, something else was there. A rhythm, not just noise, music, it repeated in a pattern that made the hairs on my neck rise. It wasn't melody in the way we understand it. It was tonal, deliberate, almost mechanical. And it didn't come from Earth. It started about an hour ago, Bobby said. Glancing back at me, his voice hushed. It's coming from directly above us, same frequency as our standard comes, but the signal's stronger than anything I've ever picked up. I leaned in and listened. The pattern was beautiful, eerie, hypnotic, but it also made my stomach twist. There was a strange sensation behind my eyes, like pressure building in my skull. "Have you reported this to Dr. Hawthorne?" I asked. "I did. Tried to," Bobby said. He looked down, hesitating. "He told me to drop it. Said to stop monitoring that frequency and stick to standard protocols." "But you didn't stop." "No, I didn't." His voice dropped lower. "And Dave? I think there's a message in it. The structure, it's too complex to be random. This isn't background radiation. It's intentional." We spent the next hour running the signal. Through every tool we had: oscilloscopes, spectrograms, modulation filters, but it was beyond us. The pattern was dense, layered with harmonics and mathematical symmetry that shouldn't have been possible. Something or someone had created it. "Bobby," I said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." I shut the door. Then I told him everything. I told him what I saw in the restricted hangar, the black and white photographs, the geometric designs etched across the sky like a blueprint, and the cracks in what the documents had labeled the firmament. I described the guards' conversation, how they believed we were weakening something. A shell, a dome, a boundary. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he just stared at me, eyes wide. So he said slowly, "You think Operation Fishbowl isn't about testing nukes at all?" I nodded. "I think we're trying to break through something. Something that's either been shielding us, or locking us in, or both. And we're doing it," he whispered. "We're breaking through." That night, I made a decision. I was going to document everything. I didn't care what it cost me. Someone needed to know what was really happening. On Johnston Atoll, I found an old Nikon camera in a forgotten equipment locker, probably left behind by one of the Navy press teams. I loaded it with film and started photographing everything I could. The abnormal telemetry readings, the strange frequency patterns, the radar scans, and most importantly, the sky. What I saw through the camera lens wasn't what I saw with my own eyes. With filters and long exposures, the sky above the island revealed its true form, a massive, sprawling lattice of geometry. Hexagons and concentric rings stretched from one horizon to the other, like a net flung across the heavens. It was too perfect to be natural, artificial, engineered. There were cracks in the pattern then, jagged lines like fractures in glass. In some places, they were barely visible. In others, wide enough to peer through. And what I saw through those cracks, it wasn't space, it wasn't the void between stars, it was darkness, but not the absence of light. This was different. It had depth, texture, a presence. Something was on the other side. Something. I captured dozens of images, using every trick I knew: filters, angles, exposures. Some showed the grid with incredible detail. Others highlighted the fractures. But a few, the ones I couldn't sleep after taking, showed what lay beyond. There were shapes in the dark, not quite organic, not quite machine. They moved slowly, deliberately, with the intelligence of something ancient, alien, and they weren't just drifting. They were watching. On the morning of July 20th, Dr. Hawthorne summoned me to his office. He called it a routine progress review. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew it. WSN single quotes to two men in civilian suits were already there, seated beside his desk. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't smile. They had the stiff, unreadable air of government operatives. Mr. Rock, Hawthorne said, trying to sound casual. These gentlemen are from Washington. They'd like to ask you a few questions about your work here. The older man stood. He was tall, lean, with neatly combed gray hair and pale eyes that didn't blink enough. Mr. Smith, he said clearly. An alias. This is my colleague, Mr. Jones. The younger man nodded but didn't say a word. Smith smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We understand you've taken a particular interest in your assignments, Mr. Rock, above and beyond your designated duties. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. I'm just trying to understand what's going on here, I said, trying to make sense of all of it. Smith's expression didn't change. That's precisely what we're concerned about. I'm just trying to do my job, sir. Your job, he cut in sharply, is telemetry calibration. Nothing more, nothing less. He didn't raise his voice, but there was something in his tone, calm and cold, that made my stomach knot. He opened a brown manila folder, pulling out a few photographs. He spread them across the desk in front of me. My photographs. These were found in your quarters during a routine security inspection. My mouth went dry, my pulse quickened. The air in the room felt thinner somehow. I can explain those. I'm sure you can, Mr. Smith said, his expression unreadable. But I don't think you understand the seriousness of what you've been doing. He tapped a finger on one of the photos. These images contain classified data locations, radiation readings, structural damage patterns, stuff that, if it got out, could compromise national security. I looked down at the images again, trying to keep my hands from shaking. They looked harmless enough, just shots of the sky. Strange distortions in the clouds, interference patterns from our instruments. But I knew better now. I'd seen things I couldn't unsee. What exactly am I looking at in these? I asked, though a part of me already knew. Mr. Smith stared at me for a long, long moment. Then he leaned back slightly, his voice lowering. You're looking at the ceiling of the world, Mr. Rock. And thanks to our work here, you're also looking at the cracks we've put in it. He leaned forward again, his eyes narrowing. Do you know what the firmament is, Mr. Rock? The Bible mentions it, I said hesitantly. Something about a barrier between the waters above and below. Exactly, he said, almost pleased. A dome, a membrane. Call it what you want. But for thousands of years, it's kept us safe, contained, blind. He gestured at the photos again. But we've changed that. With each detonation, with every high-altitude burst we've triggered, we've weakened the barrier. And with each crack, we've opened a window into something we were never meant to see. I felt like I was falling. Not physically, but mentally, like the floor beneath all my beliefs had just crumbled. What's on the other side? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Intelligence, he said finally. Purpose, intent. Things that have been watching us for longer than we've existed. And now that we've broken their cage, they're starting to take a more active interest. Mr. Smith stood up and walked to the window behind his desk, gazing out at the endless sweep of the Pacific Ocean. There's going to be another test tomorrow night, but this one's different. This one will focus all of our energy on a single point in the barrier. He turned back toward me. If we're right, it will create a breach, a large one, large enough for communication. I swallowed. Communication? With what? He didn't blink. With whatever's up there. He picked up a pen and pointed it at me. Your job is to record everything, every signal, every fluctuation, every anomaly. What we learn tomorrow will shape the future of human civilization. I left Dr. Hawthorne's office in a daze. The world outside looked the same: sunlight on concrete, waves in the distance, the hum of electric fences, but everything felt different now. Operation Fishbowl wasn't about weapons. It wasn't about testing the ionosphere. We were trying to punch through something ancient, something that had kept us sheltered from them. That night, sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about the photographs, the patterns, the geometry, and the strange shapes I glimpsed in the sky after the last detonation. They weren't just visual artifacts. I was sure of it now. Around 0300 hours, I heard it again. That hum.low-frequency. Deep. The same unnatural resonance I remembered from the Starfish Prime test. But this time, it was layered. Almost like voices underneath it, murmurs, chanting. Whispered tones that didn't come through my ears, but stirred something behind my eyes. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The sky was clear, speckled with stars. But something was wrong. The constellations weren't where they should have been. Orion was tilted. Cassiopeia was off-center. Then the stars began to move, not in the slow arc of Earth's rotation, but fast, deliberate. They darted across the sky like coordinated drones, aligning into a grid. A perfect hexagonal grid stretching across the firmament. And then, the center opened. A black circle. A void. A hole in the night sky where no stars shone. It pulsed softly at first, then brighter, glowing with an internal light that had no color I could describe. And from that circle, they came, shapes, geometric, impossibly complex. They didn't move like anything I'd ever seen. Not like machines, not like animals, but with elegance, purpose. They were beautiful. Terrifyingly beautiful, like equations made flesh. Like music solidified into motion. Their forms shifted with fractal precision, each movement perfectly calculated, hypnotic and overwhelming. And I could hear them, not with my ears, with my mind. They were speaking to me. Not in language, not in symbols, but in something deeper. Something older. A transmission that bypassed logic and carved itself directly into emotion. I couldn't make sense of it, but it felt important. Like a message meant for us. Or maybe a warning. The vision lasted 10 minutes, maybe less. Time didn't feel real while it was happening. Then, just as suddenly, the sky snapped back. The stars returned to their usual positions. The grid vanished. The circle closed. And I was alone again in my quiet quarters, staring at a sky that now seemed like a lie. But I knew the truth. What I'd seen was real. The barrier was breaking. And something on the other side was trying to get through. The second test was scheduled for 2,100 hours on July 21st. Only this time, the warhead was different. Not designed to explode in the traditional sense, but to emit a focused energy beam straight upward, like a needle piercing the veil. Dr. Hawthorne called it a drill-tip warhead, a device not built to destroy, but to penetrate. Its purpose wasn't to cause damage in the traditional sense. It was engineered to do something far more precise, far more dangerous, punch straight through the firmament. I spent the entire day calibrating telemetry equipment, trying to focus on the readouts, the sequences, the damn cables, but my thoughts kept drifting. Back to the night before. Back to the sky and the shifting, intelligent shapes moving through the stars. Back to the voices that didn't speak words, but etched meaning directly into my mind. Whatever was up there, it knew we were coming, and it was waiting. At 1800 hours. I was in the telemetry bunker double-checking power levels when Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway. He looked awful, dark bags under his eyes, unshaven, jittery from caffeine and probably zero sleep. "Dave," he said, voice low and urgent, "I need to show you something." I followed him without a word to a small storage room behind the main bunker. It was barely more than a utility closet, but Marcus had turned it into a makeshift darkroom. Chemical trays lined the counters. The air reeked of photo developer. Dozens of freshly developed photographs were pinned to every inch of the walls, held up with tacks and yellowed masking tape. "I've been developing the plates from the sky photography we did," he said, his voice strained. "And I found something. You need to see this." He handed me a black and white photo. It was of the sky above Johnston Atoll, but it didn't look anything like what you'd see with the naked eye. The hexagonal grid was visible, clearer than I'd ever seen it before. But what chilled me to my core were the cracks, dozens of them. Jagged lines running through the pattern like a fractured windshield. "When was this taken?" I asked. 3 days ago, he said, "but look at this one." He passed me another photo taken just the night before. The cracks had worsened. They were spreading, branching out, and in a few spots, I could see beyond them. Not sky, not stars, just blackness. A deep, endless dark that didn't reflect or absorb light. It just was. "It's getting worse," Marcus said quietly. Every day the cracks spread a little further. He moved to a small filing cabinet and pulled out a folder marked Classified, Eyes Only. He opened it on the desk and revealed several detailed, technical diagrams, the warhead. But it wasn't the shape that caught my attention. It was the intentionality. Every line, every circuit, every detail was too precise. This wasn't a weapon made to cause chaos. It was a tool. "They're not trying to break the firmament," Marcus said, his voice just above a whisper. "They're trying to open it, like a door." I didn't get a chance to reply. The lights flickered. Then total darkness, only the faint red glow of the darkroom safe light remained, painting everything in shades of blood. My breath caught in my throat as I looked at the photographs on the wall. They were changing. The geometric patterns were no longer static. They moved. Slowly at first, then with more urgency. The shapes beyond the cracks shifted and stretched, growing larger, closer, as if pushing against the veil separating our world from theirs. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Marcus nodded, pale and wide-eyed. "They know," he said. "They know what we're doing." A second later, the lights snapped back on. The images returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. But I felt it. A cold certainty deep in my chest. We were being watched. Not just by the things behind the firmament, but by the firmament itself. At 20:30 hours, all personnel were ordered to take their designated positions for the second test. I returned to the telemetry bunker with Dr. Hawthorne, Bobby Chun, and Dr. Kellerman. The tension in the room was suffocating, part fear, part adrenaline, part awe. We were about to do something no human had ever done. "Gentlemen," Dr. Hawthorne said, straightening his coat, "tonight we make history. Tonight we open a door that has been closed since the beginning of time. Whatever happens, whatever you see or hear, remember, you are witnessing the next stage of human evolution. At 2050 hours, the countdown began. Something felt off. The instruments picked up unexpected electromagnetic activity high in the atmosphere. The fluctuations weren't noise. They were organized, patterns, rhythms, like something was already happening up there. Are you getting this? Dr. Kellerman asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Getting what? I asked, leaning over. There's something up there, he said, pointing at his screen. Something big. It's like the entire firmament is vibrating. I looked at my own data. He was right. The readings were surreal oscillations that formed coherent, repeating patterns. Not random interference. It was like the grid above us was resonating. Like a massive instrument being played by invisible hands. To minus 60 seconds, the vibrations intensified. The ground shuddered under our feet. Not a quake more, like the island itself was reacting to the frequencies in the sky. T minus 30 seconds. Then came the sound. Low, deep, a hum that didn't enter through the ears, but resonated through the chest cavity. A harmony of tones, as if the entire sky had become a speaker for something beyond. We weren't initiating the test anymore. We were answering a call. It didn't start with the low-frequency hum we'd heard during previous tests. This was something else entirely, something that sounded eerily like singing, but not human singing. It was layered, intricate, beautiful in a way that made your chest tighten, but terrifying too, like hearing a hymn at your own funeral. It wasn't words. Exactly. It felt like voices speaking in music and mathematics, resonating through something deeper than hearing. To minus 10 seconds, someone said over the intercom. The countdown felt distant. The singing grew louder, more complex. Notes stacked on notes in impossible harmony. And then, through the thick concrete walls of the telemetry bunker, I saw it light. Not the blinding white flash of a nuclear detonation. This was something softer, warmer. It pulsed, almost like it was alive, matching the rhythm of the singing. 5, 2, 1. At exactly 21 o'clock hours, the drill-tip warhead detonated 250 miles above Johnston Atoll, but there was no boom. No blinding burst like Starfish Prime. Instead, the light built gradually like a sunrise in reverse, pulling shadows upward into brightness. It spread slowly at first, then all at once, saturating the sky with a strange, otherworldly glow. That's when I saw it, through the bunker walls. Through the very ceiling above us. The firmament, if that's even the right word, wasn't a solid dome or invisible ceiling like we'd imagined. It was alive. A vast living structure of geometric patterns and radiant lines, breathing with inner light like some kind of celestial organism. Where the warhead had struck, there was now an opening, not a crack or rupture, but a doorway, clean, deliberate. And something was coming through. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. A being of pure geometry and shifting light, all angles and curves that didn't obey the laws of physics. It wasn't floating, it was descending, slowly, deliberately, with purpose. And somehow, impossibly, I heard it speak, not in words, not in sound, in thoughts, feelings, ideas too complex to translate. But one message cut through it all, unmistakable. We have been waiting. The being hovered above Johnston Atoll for exactly 17 seconds. In that time, every instrument on the island went insane. Magnetic fields spiked and twisted. Radiation levels climbed beyond anything we'd prepared for. The air itself vibrated, humming like a tuning fork struck by a divine hand. And we just stood there, unable to move, unable to look away. Then, just as suddenly, it withdrew. The hole in the firmament closed seamlessly, like it had never been there. The light faded. The singing stopped, and we were alone again. But it wasn't the same kind of silence. It was thicker, heavier, like the World itself had shifted beneath our feet. In the days that followed, the official report came in. They called it a partial success. Said there were unexpected complications, radiation levels within acceptable parameters, electromagnetic disturbances consistent with previous high-altitude detonations. And of course, no anomalous readings, no mention of lights or music or contact. But we all knew that was a lie. Dr. Kellerman cracked first. 3 days after the second test, I found him in his quarters, hunched over his logbook, scribbling the same phrase again and again. There's something on the other side, over and over. Dozens of pages. They sedated him within the hour and had him flown off the island. No explanation. No goodbye. Then it was Marcus Webb. He became obsessed with the photographs he'd taken during the test. He spent every waking hour in the darkroom, developing and redeveloping the same frames, convinced he could see faces in the patterns of light, real faces watching us. He believed the beings were using the photographs to speak to us, to reach us. He told me that once, his hands trembling, eyes wide like he hadn't slept in days. They're trying to talk to us through the light, he whispered. And then one night, he was gone, vanished, along with his camera, his notes, all his prints. The report claimed a psychotic break and evacuation to a psychiatric facility on the mainland. But I saw the men who came for him, plainclothes, unmarked black cases. The same ones who had grilled me in Dr. Hawthorne's office. I knew better. Next was Bobby Chun. He lasted the longest, but even he couldn't hold on. He started hearing things in the radio static. Not the music, we'd all remember that music forever, but something darker, angrier. He said it sounded like screaming, like something trapped and furious. They're mad, he kept whispering. We broke their house, and now they're mad. I found him one morning in the communications room, spinning the dials like a man possessed, muttering nonsense into the mic. By afternoon, he was gone too. And then there was just me, Dr. Hawthorne, and a skeleton crew of staff who either hadn't seen what we'd seen, or were too afraid to admit it. But Hawthorne, he wasn't okay either. He looked hollow, pale. His clothes hung loose on his thinning frame. His hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. Sometimes I'd catch him staring up at the sky at night, eyes wide, mouth barely moving, as if silently begging for something to stay away or come back. I never asked which, and me? I kept it together, at least on the outside, but every night, when the lights were off and the air was still, I could still hear it. The singing, and I knew deep in my bones that they were still watching, still waiting. Dr. Hawthorne had been acting strange for weeks, quieter, gaunt, and increasingly distant. I'd catch him staring out at the sky at night, not just looking, but gazing like a man who'd seen something he couldn't explain, couldn't forget. His expression wasn't one of wonder. It was the face of someone carrying knowledge too heavy for the human mind. On August 15th, exactly 1 month after the second test, he summoned me to his office. I figured it was for another security briefing. I was wrong. When I walked in, he was pacing behind his desk, his movements agitated and unfocused. On the table beside him sat a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a glass that looked barely touched. The air in the room was heavy, stale with anxiety and alcohol. "Sit down. Rock," he said, not looking at me. I sat quietly, watching him wear a path into the floor. He didn't say a word for several minutes, just kept pacing, rubbing his temples, muttering to himself. Then he stopped at the window that overlooked the vast emptiness of the Pacific. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and strained. "Do you know what we've done?" I hesitated. "Sir?" He turned halfway, eyes hollow, not quite focused on me. "Do you understand what we've accomplished here? What we've unleashed?" I didn't lie. I think we opened a door that was never meant to be opened. He gave a short, bitter laugh, dry and humorless. "A door, yeah. That's one way to put it. He exhaled sharply and shook his head. We didn't just break through some atmospheric layer or breach the edge of space. We opened a passage into something else. A realm that runs alongside ours, inhabited by beings that don't obey our laws of physics or reason. They're made of energy, geometry, numbers. I think they've been watching us since the beginning. He paused and stared out the window again, his voice barely audible. And I don't think they're happy. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The firmament. It wasn't just a barrier rock. It was a defense mechanism. A cage, something ancient put there to keep us separated from them. And we just tore it open. Then he turned, eyes meeting mine, and what I saw in them made my stomach knot. There's going to be a third test. October 12th. My mouth went dry. You're serious? This one. It's going to tear the firmament wide open, permanently. I stood up, heart pounding. Then we have to stop it. He laughed again. This time, there was hysteria in Ain. The sound. He slumped back in his chair and poured himself another drink, his hand shaking as he lifted the bottle. Stop it? Jesus rock, I'm not in charge. I never was. The people who run this program, the ones behind the curtain, they knew exactly what they were doing. They want to break through. They want contact. Why? I asked. Why would anyone want that? They think they can control it, he said bitterly. They want to harness the power of something they don't even understand, to turn it into a weapon, a tool, whatever they think it can be. He looked me dead in the eye. They don't realize some doors, once opened, can never be closed. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait around and be part of the third test. I was going to get off Johnston, and I was going to take proof. I was going to tell the world the truth about Operation Fishbowl. The next week, I worked. Quietly, carefully. I gathered what I could: copies of classified documents, technical data on the drill tip warhead, telemetry readouts, and early analysis from the first 2 detonations. I even managed to steal one of Marcus Webb's undeveloped photographic plates, the one with the clearest image of the opening in the FIRMAME dot. My plan was simple: hide in the cargo, hold of the monthly supply flight, and pray I could make it to Hawaii before they realized I was gone. I knew the risks, but it was the only way, but they knew. The night before the supply flight, I woke up to footsteps outside my quarters. Not the slow, aimless walk of the night patrol. These were precise, deliberate. They were coming straight for me. I barely had time to hide the photographic plate, tucked it inside my sock before the door flew open. Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones stood there, flanked by 2 armed guards. Smith had a syringe in his hand filled with some kind of clear fluid. Time for debriefing, Mr. Rock, he said, calm as ever. I bolted. I didn't think, just ran, but the guards were faster. They tackled me, pinned me to the floor. I fought back, but it was hopeless. I felt the needle jab into my arm, and almost instantly, a warm numbness spread through my veins. My limbs got heavy. My thoughts slowed, like they were sinking underwater. Don't worry, Smith said as my vision blurred. This won't hurt. You'll just forget a few things. Unimportant things. Classified things. But it didn't work. Not the way they expected. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe I just got lucky. But I held on to more than they wanted me to. The details were hazy: names, timelines, coordinates, but the important parts stuck. The glowing patterns in the sky, the hole in the firmament. The voices that weren't voices at all, the things that lived beyond. I was flown off Johnston the next morning, the official paperwork said. I'd been honorably discharged from the Air Force for psychological distress related to prolonged deployment in a high-stress environment. My records were sealed. My clearance revoked. I was given a stern warning: if I ever spoke to anyone about what I'd seen, there would be consequences. But I still remembered. I remember everything that matters. They thought they had silenced me. They were wrong. For the next 25 years, I buried myself in research, trying to piece together what had really happened at Johnston Atoll and what it meant for all of us. I started with Operation Fishbowl, digging through declassified reports, cross-referencing timelines, tracking down anyone who might have served there during that strange, sweltering summer of 1962. Most of them were dead. The official causes? Car accidents, suicides, cancer linked to delayed radiation exposure. But the patterns were too clean, too convenient. The ones I managed to find alive were in no shape to talk. Some had clearly been dosed with the same memory suppression drugs I'd been given scattered recollections. Missing time, blank stares when I brought up the test site. Others were so emotionally shattered, they could barely speak of that place without shaking. A few just wept. One tried to kill himself the night after we talked. But even with their silence, I found enough. Enough to confirm what I already suspected deep down. Operation Fishbowl wasn't about nuclear testing. Not really. It was about something else. Something bigger, Doc. It was about the firmament. And what lies beyond it. The third test happened on October 12, 1962. Just days before the Cuban Missile Crisis pushed the world to the edge of nuclear war. The official report called it a partial success. But I know the truth. I saw the truth. That test succeeded. It created a breach, a hole in the sky, and that hole has never fully closed. Since then, strange things have been happening if you know how to look. A surge in UFO sightings that began right after '62. Geometric cloud formations that don't behave like weather. People hearing voices in their sleep, not in words, but in equations and melodies. We opened the doorway. And they've been watching us ever since. I managed to smuggle out one photographic plate before the government shut everything down. Just one. It shows the firmament not as a simple sky or barrier, but as something alive. A structure. An organism. And in the center of the image is the breach. You can see it clear as day. A ragged black wound torn open by our drill tip warhead. And behind it, darkness. Not empty space. No, this darkness moves. There are shapes within it. Shapes I can't describe without sounding insane. But they're real. They are aware. They've been watching, waiting, and they are not pleased with what we've done. The government knows. They've known since day one. That's why the real data from Operation Fishbowl was buried under miles of red tape. That's why they silenced us. Classified the evidence, painted it all as routine Cold War posturing. But it wasn't about Russia. It wasn't about deterrence. It was about what's above us. I've hidden this manuscript where someone will eventually find it, along with the photographic plate. Maybe you'll be the one reading this. If so, be careful. Don't trust what you've been told about the sky. Don't believe for a second that it's just ozone and atmosphere, because we cracked the ceiling. And something on the other side is staring back. Recovered journal entry classification. Redacted subject. Eli Granger, independent journalist. Date range. July 15th to 18th, 2023. Location. Bohemian Grove, Monte Rio, California. This document was pulled from an encrypted Icelandic server. Eli Granger's current whereabouts are unknown. My name is Eli Granger. I'm a freelance journalist. Or at least I was. If you're reading this, I might already be dead. What I saw in the redwoods of Northern California, deep inside Bohemian Grove, will haunt me for the rest of my life, however long that may be. It all began 3 weeks ago on a rainy Thursday morning in Oakland. I was sitting in my shoebox apartment, sipping my third stale cup of coffee and scrolling through secure message boards. That's where whistleblowers usually pop up when they're scared, desperate, or about to vanish. My inbox pinged, a new message, no subject line. The sender's address was just a mess of numbers and letters, rerouted through at least 7 proxy servers. There was no body text, just a high-resolution PDF attachment and 4 cryptic lines. You. Want truth? Go to the Redwoods. Bring a black suit and a quiet soul. July 15th to 18th. The fire reveals all the file attached was a scan clean. Sharp, definitely real of what looked like a guest registry. For Bohemian Grove, that place has always been a magnet for conspiracy theories, secret ceremonies, elite gatherings. The rumors say world leaders and billionaires meet there every summer to burn effigies and whisper decisions that shape the fate of nations. I'd written about it once before, but never thought I'd get this close. Now I had an invitation. Sort of. I packed light. Just a suit, my recorder, and enough gear to keep me off grid. July 15th. I drove north, past San Francisco, into the thick redwoods of Monte Rio. The air grew colder. Quieter. By the time I reached the grove's perimeter, my hands were shaking. I had no credentials, no invite, but as I stepped out of the trees, a man in a black suit met me with a nod. No questions, no words. He just opened a small gate and gestured for me to follow. Inside, the world changed. There were cabins built like summer camps, but cleaner, too clean. Wealth in every detail. Silver trays, crystal decanters, fire pits that smelled faintly of incense and something. Older. At night, they lit massive fires. Men in robes chanted in Latin. Not mock rituals, not theatrics. This was real. You could feel it in your bones, something old. Something that had been waiting. On the second night, they brought out the effigy. A massive wooden owl, easily 40 feet tall. They called it Moloch. I'd read the rumors, but nothing prepared me for seeing it firsthand. They lit torches. The flames roared. A recorded scream played over loudspeakers as they cremated their cares. But I don't think it was just a symbol. I don't think it was just a scream. The next day, I started feeling off, disoriented, like time was folding in on itself. I heard whispers when no one was near. My recorder captured voices I never heard in person speaking in strange, guttural tones. And the trees watched by the last night. I was no longer sure what was real. During the final ceremony, a few of the robed figures peeled off from the crowd and entered a smaller circle deep in the woods. I followed. I shouldn't have. They stood around a fire that burned blue. In the center was a figure, not a person, not really. Its face shifted, flickered, like static trying to form an image. I watched in silence, crouched behind a fallen log, heart hammering against my ribs. I saw one of the men remove his mask and kneel. The shifting figure placed a hand on his head. He screamed once and then fell silent. His body twitched. Then he stood, but he wasn't the same. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark. And when he spoke, it wasn't English. That's when I ran. I don't remember how I got out. I woke up hours later in my car, parked on a dirt road miles from the grove. My phone was wiped. My recorder shattered, but I still had the guest registry file, and now I'm hiding. Writing this down while I still have time. Because something happened in those woods, something ancient, something powerful. And I think I brought a piece of it back with me. I'd covered Bohemian Grove before. Written exposes based on leaked documents from the 80s, grainy. Photographs, hearsay passed down from whistleblowers too scared to go on the record. But this was different. The guest list attached to that anonymous email chilled me to the core. These weren't just powerful men. These were the architects of the modern world. Former U.S. presidents. Sitting senators, billionaire defense, contractors, some whose companies I'd spent years investigating, the CEOs of the top 5 tech giants, executives from pharmaceutical empires and private intelligence firms, media barons with the power to shape the beliefs of entire populations. They were all scheduled to attend an event called the Midsummer Encampment. At the bottom of the document was something even more disturbing. An access pass, forged but flawless. It had my name, Edmund Gray, and labeled me as a logistics consultant for a company called Prometheus Industries. It also had my photo. A professional headshot I'd never sent anyone, doctored to show me in a black suit and tie. Someone wanted me inside that grove. Someone powerful. I should have deleted it all. Should have slammed the lid of my laptop shut, burned the files, and gone back to writing safe pieces stories about city council bribery or tax loopholes. But instead, I packed a black suit and drove north to Sonoma County, the road to Monte. Rio twisted through ancient redwood forests, the kind of landscape that made you believe in druids and ghosts. Trees hundreds of feet tall blocked out the sky, turning midday into a kind of eternal dusk. Places like this were supposed to be peaceful home to yoga retreats and organic farms, not global conspiracies. But I learned during my time in Navy, intel, the most dangerous secrets are always hidden behind the calmest facades. I checked into a dusty roadside motel in Gurneville, then spent the evening walking the perimeter of Bohemian Grove. It was no summer camp. The compound was over 2,000 acres of dense forest, all enclosed by chain link fencing topped with razor wire. Security cameras hung from tree trunks every 50 feet. Motion sensors, infrared scanners, possibly more that I couldn't see. The main gate had 2 guards, both dressed in matte black tactical gear. These weren't rent-a-cops. They had the posture and dead-eyed stare of men trained to kill and forget. Whatever happened inside that forest, it was guarded like a military black site. And yet, when I approached with my forged pass in hand, guards barely blinked. They scanned the barcode, glanced at my face, then waved me through. It was too smooth, too perfect. Either the forger was a genius, or someone inside had already greased the wheels. Neither possibility made me feel safer. Inside, Bohemian Grove looked almost quaint, like a summer retreat for aging millionaires. Gravel walkways twisted between towering redwoods. Rustic wooden cabins with names like Owl's Nest, Dragon's Den, and Caveman's Lodge dotted the forest floor. If you didn't know better, it might have seemed charming, wholesome even, but there was a wrongness in the air. Something rotten underneath the cedar, smoke and pine needles. The men there, the guests, weren't like anyone I'd ever seen. They moved with the casual arrogance of people who'd never been told no. Power dripped off them like sweat. By day, they looked almost normal. Khakis, palas, boat shoes. Laughing in small clusters, drinks in hand. But as I passed, snippets of conversation drifted into earshot. The Shanghai Index will drop 17%. That gives us 3 days. Tell the secretary Operation Nightfall is greenlit for October. Media blackout should hold at least 72 hours, then pivot to flood the channels with fluff. This wasn't idle gossip. This was control. I kept my cover tight. Edmund Gray, logistics consultant. My forged credentials gave me a reason to walk the grounds, clipboard in hand, pretending to monitor event schedules and supply drops. Of course, they confiscated my phone at the gate and issued a secure device in its place. It looked like a normal smartphone, but couldn't access anything outside the internal Grove network. No Wi-Fi, no data. Just a few pre-installed tools. But the ruse worked. Rich men don't notice the people who handle their food and transportation. We're invisible to them, which is how I got close enough to see. The symbols came first. Owls. Everywhere. Carved into the trees, stamped into the metal of lampposts, etched onto doorknobs, benches, even the drinking fountains. Not friendly cartoon. Owls, but stylized, sharp, angular, predatory. Their eyes always followed you, no matter where you stood. Then came the lake. At the center of the grove lay an artificial body of water with a small island at its heart. And on that island, a statue, a 40-foot-tall stone owl. Even in broad daylight, it radiated something primal, something ancient. The air around it felt thick, like walking into a church where no one had prayed in centuries. But something had listened anyway, and at its feet, hidden beneath moss and vines, were words worn nearly smooth by time. Weaving spiders come not here, that it wasn't just a slogan, that it was a warning. I felt it in my bones. This wasn't a place where deals were made. It was where they were consecrated. Whatever this place was, whatever these men were doing here, it was deeper than politics. Older than corporations, that something had been worshipped here long before. America existed, and now it was waking up. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice startled me. I turned to see an older man, late 70s, maybe standing just a few feet away, his pale blue eyes fixed on the enormous owl statue across the lake. His silver hair was immaculately combed back, and he wore a pressed linen shirt tucked into beige slacks, a look that screamed quiet wealth. His skin had that smooth, leathery look you only get from winters spent in Palm Beach. The smile on his face was calm. Too calm. "That's the Owl of Bohemia," he said, stepping up beside me at the water's edge. "Been watching over this place for more than a century. Some folks say it's just decoration." He paused, eyes still on the statue. "Others know better." I didn't want to engage. I was supposed to be a ghost here, just another invisible consultant among the Monegal elites, but the question slipped out before I could stop it. No matter how. The man turned slightly toward me and smiled. His teeth were unnaturally white, almost glossy veneers probably. Too perfect for a man his age. His eyes seemed to twinkle in the dying light. "You'll see tonight, Mr. Gray. The cremation of care waits for no man. Not even consultants." Before I could ask how he knew my name, he was already walking away, hands casually behind his back, as if we'd never spoken. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the towering owl across the water, a sense of unease coiling in my gut. How much had I already given away? By dusk, the entire mood of the place shifted. Gone was the easy banter, the golf carts, the casual whiskey in plastic tumblers. As twilight deepened, the grove took on an air of something older, darker. Ancient men emerged from the cabins in hooded black robes that swept the ground. Their faces were hidden, movements deliberate. Some held torches, their flames flickering in the growing shadows. Others carried items I didn't recognize, things that looked like they belonged in a museum or a temple. When I returned to my assigned cabin, I found a robe waiting for me, folded neatly on the bed. Beside it, a small handwritten note. "Attendance is mandatory. Silence is sacred. The owl sees all." I stared at the note longer than I should have. My hands trembled as I picked up the robe. It smelled faintly of incense and something else. Something sickly sweet and organic, like dried blood or rotting flowers. Night fell fast, and the crowd moved through the woods in silence, hundreds of dark figures gliding between the trees. The only sounds were the rustling of robes and the crunch of gravel beneath leather shoes. Torches burned along the forest path, casting long dancing shadows. I kept my head down, blending in. We reached a natural amphitheater surrounding the lake. The great owl loomed over the water, its stone eyes glowing red in the torchlight. The sheer size of it made my chest tighten. It didn't feel symbolic. It felt watchful. At the lake's edge, a wooden boat rested in the shallows. In it lay a small figure wrapped tightly in white cloth. My breath caught. From a distance, it could have been a doll. Up close, it was too real. Too perfect. The proportions, the way the fabric hugged the body underneath. It wasn't straw or sawdust. It had weight, substance. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it was an illusion. A man stepped onto a raised platform beside the owl. His robe was more elaborate, lined with deep crimson. His hood was up, but I recognized his posture, the cadence of his voice. I'd seen him on television 1,000 times. A former president, long retired, yet still influential. Brothers of the Grove. His voice rang out across the water, amplified by hidden speakers. We gather once more beneath the ancient eyes of wisdom to perform the sacred rite that frees us from the burdens of conscience. As one, the robed crowd responded. We banish care and cast it to the flames. The chant continued, a ritual call and response, the words growing louder, more rhythmic. Care, that pale and common thing that binds the hands of power. Care that whispers doubt in the ears of decision. Care that stays the sort of necessary action. Each phrase was repeated like scripture, and with every word, the air grew heavier. I felt my heart thudding in my chest, felt sweat trickle down my spine despite the cool night air. They spoke names, ancient names. I recognized from my studies Moloch, the Carthaginian god who demanded the sacrifice of children. Enlil, the Mesopotamian god of wind and divine authority. These weren't metaphors. These weren't literary flourishes. These were invocations. American leaders, CEOs, senators, judges, and generals were standing in the dark woods, calling out to the gods of fire and conquest and death. And they meant it. But the most horrifying part wasn't the ancient paganism. It wasn't even the symbolic sacrifice of what might have been a child. It was how comfortable they were. They recited the words with ease, with practice, like they'd done it many times before. There was no discomfort, no irony, no hesitation. Just solemn, almost joyful commitment to casting aside compassion in the name of power. The boat was pushed into the water. It drifted slowly toward the center of the lake, carried by an invisible current. Then, without warning, fire erupted around. It brilliant orange and red flames that burst from the water itself. Gas jets. Had to be. Still, the illusion was terrifying. The bundle in the boat caught quickly, the flames consuming the white cloth. As it burned, the fabric peeled away, revealing God, I don't know. My mind has replayed that moment 1,000 times. And it always comes back blurry. Smoke twisted in front of my eyes. Shadows danced across the water. But there was something beneath that cloth. Something too realistic to be fake. Too still to be alive. It might have been a mannequin. It might have been something worse. I don't know. I truly don't. And I don't think I ever want to. The way the mannequin shifted, almost lifelike, could have been nothing more than the fire-consuming internal supports, twisting plastic and metal into grotesque mimicry of movement. And the high-pitched sound that echoed over the lake, probably just air escaping from burning materials. That's what I told myself, over and over, but it didn't explain the reactions. Some of the robed men stood frozen, heads bowed in silent reverence. Others openly wept, shoulders shaking as the flames consumed the offering. A few cheered quietly, but with unmistakable joy, smiles wide beneath their hoods. It wasn't grief, it was triumph. It wasn't theater. It was belief. As the fire died down, the group slowly began to break apart. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. A few figures lingered, staring into the ashes like they were trying to read the future. I turned to follow the crowd back to the cabins, head still down, heart still pounding. That's when a hand fell gently on my shoulder. Mr. Gray. I turned. It was the old man from earlier, the one with the perfect teeth and icy eyes. He was still wearing his ceremonial robes, but his hood was down now, revealing that same serene expression. You're invited to the inner circle gathering, a rare honor for a consultant. There was no question in his voice, just certainty. I started to decline, but before I could get the words out, 2 other men stepped in beside me. Not aggressive, just present. Close enough that I knew walking away wasn't an option. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my face unreadable. Good, the old man said with a faint smile. Follow me. They led me deeper into the forest, down paths I hadn't seen during my earlier surveillance. We passed massive oaks twisted by age, the kind of trees that seemed to remember things. The air was cooler here, damp and heavy with moss and thyme. Eventually, we emerged into a small clearing surrounded by stone. The trees pulled back just enough to reveal the night sky, stars flickering above like distant watchers. Maybe 30 men stood in a wide circle around a fire pit, carved directly into the bedrock, no torches, no fanfare. Just flame and shadow and silence. The theatrical flair of the lake ceremony was gone. This felt ancient, sacred, and deadly serious. At midnight, the ritual began. The participants had exchanged their robes for bone-white mask owls again, but not stylized or artistic like the statue. These were smooth, polished, carved to resemble the skulls of real birds with hollow sockets that revealed nothing of the eyes behind them. Somehow that made it worse. They moved in unison with practiced precision, like dancers in a routine they'd rehearsed for decades. This wasn't improvisation. This was tradition. The man who had led the lakeside ritual, the former president, stepped into the center. With his mask on and his voice softened by the absence of microphones, he seemed smaller, ordinary. He was no longer a world leader, just another servant. "Brothers of the inner grove," he intoned, his voice low but clear. "We gather to receive the wisdom of the ancient ones, and to consecrate the plans that will shape the world's destiny." The others responded in a language I didn't recognize. At first, the sounds were harsh clashing consonants, guttural vowels. It bypassed logic and reason, going straight to the part of my brain that dealt in nightmares and instinct. But then, buried in the cadence, I caught familiar echoes. My training in naval intelligence kicked in. Adian, the ancient language of Mesopotamia. Dead for over 2,000 years, I'd seen it referenced in black-budget research. Deep files, buried inside the CIA's archive. Project MKUltra wasn't just about LSD and mind control. It had offshoots divisions focused on ritual programming, symbols, sounds, languages capable of bypassing conscious resistance and rewriting belief. Itself, they said it ended in the 70s. They were wrong. Symbols were drawn in the ash around the fire pit. Not random occult nonsense, these were sigils I recognized. Glyphs pulled from ancient Sumerian texts. Some matched diagrams in the declassified MKUltra files. Others were new, or at least new to me. A map was unrolled on the ground, not of countries but of systems, economic zones, resource clusters, population centers. The men spoke in a mixture of English and Adian as they circled it. There were no pretenses anymore. No allegiance to borders or governments. The plan was global, and it was already in motion. Wars to be triggered, regimes to be replaced, epidemics to be allowed, even encouraged, populations to be controlled, reduced, shifted, and threaded through it all. Every decision, every cold calculation was that ancient voice speaking through them, guiding them. They didn't see themselves as Americans or even as human. They were servants. The harvest approaches. One masked figure said, voice flat, "The sleepers must be awakened." Another added, "The old seals must be broken." A third intoned, raising both hands, "In the name of those who wait in the deep places." And the group answered together, "Let the work continue." I was hidden beyond the edge of the firelight, crouched low behind a boulder slick with moss. My right shoe had a hollow heel where I'd stashed a miniature audio recorder. It had been running since I'd left the cabin, but I was starting to question what good it would do, even if I escaped, even if I made it out, because what I was witnessing wasn't just conspiracy. It wasn't corruption. It wasn't even evil in the traditional sense. It was worship. These men titans of government, business, and media truly believed they were preparing the world for something greater, something inhuman. And whether the ancient ones were real or just a delusion of broken minds didn't matter, because they believed. And they had the power to act on that belief. The ritual neared its end. One by one, each participant stepped forward and knelt at the center of the circle. A silver chalice was passed from hand to hand. Each man drank from it, making a pledge in Adian before retreating back into the ring. The liquid inside looked black in the firelight like oil or thickened blood. Several of them convulsed after, drinking, their bodies shaking violently. A few dropped to their knees, eyes rolling back to reveal nothing but white. No one helped them. No one even reacted. It was part of the process. As the first hints of dawn brushed the treetops, the circle dissolved. Men began to drift back into the woods, masks tucked beneath their arms, robes fluttering quietly in the morning breeze. And I sat there in the shadows, heart pounding, staring at the dying fire and wondering if I would ever be able to sleep again. The masks came off, and just like I'd feared, they were exactly who I thought. Former presidents, current senators, high-ranking military brass, CEOs of companies that practically ran the world. They shook hands with the calm assurance of men who had nothing left to prove. They spoke quietly, not like conspirators, but like businessmen wrapping up a very profitable deal. And in a way, that's exactly what this was. I slipped away as the first light began to pierce through the redwood canopy, bathing the forest floor in soft golden beams. My cabin wasn't far, but every crunch of pine needles beneath my boots felt louder than it should have. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following. Nobody was, not yet, but I could feel it. Whatever protection my forged ID had once offered was evaporating. I caught too many looks, prolonged stares that went on a second too long. Too many polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes. They knew. Not everything, but enough. They were letting me see it. Letting me get close enough to understand just how deep I'd wandered into their world. And they were enjoying it. Still, there was one last place I had to see before I left. A place known only by whispered references and a curious marking on a map I'd managed to get my hands on. They called it the Lodge of Marked Sticks. It sat away from the main encampment, isolated down a narrow, unpaved road that didn't appear on any guest maps. I'd noticed it during my first reconnaissance, the very first day. But the opportunity to investigate hadn't come until now. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Another wooden lodge, styled like the others, blending perfectly into the woods, just rustic enough to seem forgettable. But the security said otherwise. Biometric scanners, electromagnetic locks, motion sensors so sensitive they could pick up a heartbeat from 50 feet out. Luckily, I hadn't come here empty-handed. Sewn into the inner lining of my blazer was a USB device. It looked like any generic thumb drive, but it was anything but. The person who sent it to me, whoever they were, was no amateur. When I plugged it into the access panel, the lodge's security system flickered, hesitated, then went dark. Not entirely. Just enough, a blind spot. Enough time to get in. A small window, but carefully calculated. This wasn't luck. Whoever had helped me had planned this infiltration with clinical precision. Inside, the lodge was exactly as unremarkable as it looked at first. Wooden walls, minimalist furniture, the faint scent of cedar and dust. But I wasn't fooled. I ran my hands along the far wall until I found it, a hairline seam, nearly invisible. I pressed. A soft click answered me. A panel swung inward. Behind it, stairs. They descended straight into the earth beneath the forest, not with modern concrete or steel, but carved directly into the bedrock. Old stone, ancient. The walls bore the marks of tools, long obsolete. And yet someone had installed electric lighting, modern fixtures wired crudely into antique sconces out at the bottom of the stairs. A heavy oak door stood slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I pushed it open and froze. The chamber beyond was enormous, far too large to exist beneath the modest lodge I'd entered. It stretched out like a cathedral hidden beneath the roots of the forest. Stone shelves lined the walls, packed with leather-bound journals, faded scrolls, and artifacts I couldn't begin to understand. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, oil, and something metallic. At the center of the room stood a massive table, carved from a single slab of obsidian. It was cold to the touch. Almost wet. Maps and blueprints covered its surface, alongside folders stamped with government seals and insignia I didn't recognize. I reached for the nearest journal, one from a shelf labeled 1923 to 1945. The leather creaked as I opened it. The handwriting inside was neat, elegant. The kind of script you only saw in old letters or private memoirs. But the words ... double quotes the European. Situation proceeds according to plan. Our associates in Berlin remain loyal, though they still believe they serve the fatherland. The lesser peoples. Their sacrifice will fuel the next phase of the great work. I swallowed hard. My hands were shaking, but I kept reading. Another journal. More recent. Operation Mockingbird exceeds expectations. Media outlets follow our guidance without hesitation. They believe they serve truth, but unknowingly spread the narratives we design. The sleeping masses accept whatever reality we provide. My stomach turned. I backed away, but something on the table caught my eye, a familiar name stamped across. A document. I stepped forward again and stared. Blueprints for the U.S., a Patriot Act. But these were dated 6 months before September 11th, 2001. Next to it, a detailed battle plan for the invasion of Iraq. Intelligence briefings, maps, false reports about weapons of mass destruction created before the public had even heard the words axis of evil. Another folder contained early concept documents for social media algorithms, designs that had nothing to do with connection or community and everything to do with division. Charts mapping user behavior, psychological manipulation patterns, emotional targeting. And then there were the newest documents. The ones that truly chilled me. Plans for a global pandemic response not focused on health or safety, but control. Containment zones. Mandatory tracking. Vaccine passports linked to biometric databases. Digital currency frameworks designed to eliminate anonymity in all financial transactions. Environmental programs that, on the surface, aimed to save the planet, but hidden within them were proposals for strict population control, selective sterilization, food supply regulation, all buried under the language of sustainability. But the worst was the roster, a list of names. Names I recognized. Back in the dusty archives of that underground chamber, the pages reached deep into the past, far deeper than I ever expected. Names I'd only seen in history books leapt off the paper. Carnegie, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, titans of the Gilded Age, the men who'd built America's industrial empire. But then came the names that made no sense. Figures supposedly from much earlier eras, centuries before the Bohemian Club was even founded in the 1870s. People who, by all historical accounts, should have been long dead, or had never existed at all outside of myth and speculation. It didn't add up. Either the record-keeping was catastrophically wrong, or some of these people weren't entirely human. My fingers trembled as I turned the last page of the current roster, and there, written in fresh ink, was a note that stopped my breath cold. E. Granger, journalist. Witnessed Inner Circle ceremony, July 16th, 2023. Asset or liability. Recommend termination if no compliance by dawn, July 18th. They knew who I was, not just recently, not just from a tip or a slip-up, from the very beginning. The anonymous email, the fake access credentials, the perfectly timed codes. None of it had been real, not in the way I thought. It was all a setup, a test, and I was failing. Somewhere in the chamber, a sensor chirped softly. Red lights began blinking along the walls. I froze. The faint sound of boots on stone echoed through the stairwell. Heavy, deliberate. Not a panicked scramble, methodical. Professional. Tactical. They were coming. I grabbed what I could. Folded documents, crammed them into my jacket, stuffed notebooks under my arm, anything I could carry. I spun around, heart pounding, eyes scanning for another exit. But there was only the way I came in, and it was about to be crowded with people who wouldn't be interested in asking questions. The footsteps got louder. Voices followed. Low. Clipped communication over radios. Military code. Efficient. Precise. Then, without warning, the lights died. Total darkness swallowed everything. For a single heartbeat, the only sound was my breathing. Then the emergency lights flickered on dim. Red, casting long shadows that made the shelves look like towering gravestones. And in that sliver of blackness between full light and red glow, I heard something, not with my ears, inside my head, a voice. Run, little journalist. Run and tell the world what you've seen. But understand your telling will bring your doom and the world's salvation. It demands far greater sacrifices than one man's life. I staggered back. My breath caught in my throat. When the red light stabilized, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A piece of the stone wall had shifted, revealing a tunnel narrow, low, leading down into the dark. I didn't question it. I ran. Who or what had spoken to me, I couldn't say. Maybe it was one of the ancient ones, the entities they all bowed to. Or maybe something even older. But it had given me a chance, a slim one. I took it. The tunnel bent and twisted, ancient stone walls. Slick with moisture and etched with symbols like the ones I'd seen during the inner circle ceremony. But these were different, older, faded and worn smooth, as if they'd been touched by countless hands or claws over centuries. Phosphorescent moss glowed along the ceiling, casting a faint green light. It wasn't much, but it kept me from tripping on the uneven floor or bashing my head on the low ceiling. The air was colder down here, heavy, and yet, somehow, it felt alive. Like the tunnels themselves were breathing. I kept moving, deeper and deeper, for what felt like hours. I could hear the occasional sound of voices. Flashlight beams flickered through cracks and openings. Radio chatter echoed briefly, then disappeared. They were close, but not too close. Either they couldn't find the hidden entrance, or they didn't want to follow me down here. Eventually, the tunnel began to rise. The air changed. I smelled fresh rain, wet leaves, the earthy scent of the forest. The passage ended in a curtain of vines, hiding a narrow crevice that opened into the woods. I pushed through, stumbling out into open air, lungs burning and heart pounding. I was miles from the main compound. The trees around me were dense, wild. The sky overhead roiled with storm clouds. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Fat raindrops started to fall, perfect cover. If I could make it to my car before they expanded the search perimeter, I might have a shot. But as I moved, weaving between the trees, I realized something was wrong. I wasn't alone. Shapes moved just beyond the edges of my vision, tall, smooth, gliding with unnatural silence. Not the tactical squads I was expecting. These figures were something else. They wore bone white owl masks, the same ones I'd seen during the inner circle ceremony, but the way they moved, it was wrong. Too fluid, too graceful. Like their bodies didn't obey the same laws. Mine did. And their eyes, they glowed. Not from reflected light, from within. One of them turned toward me. I didn't hear the words with my ears, but I understood. Them all the same. The journalist sees too much. Another replied, its voice layered with something ancient and cold. The ancient ones are displeased, but the compact must be honored. A third one, taller, wearing a robe stitched with symbols that shimmered in the stormlight, spoke without moving its mouth. He was brought here for a purpose. Let him carry the message. Let the outer world know what awaits. I didn't wait. For more, I ran. Behind me, laughter echoed through the trees. Not quite human. Not pursuit. It was something worse. Permission. The sound behind me wasn't just unsettling. It was the sound of something ancient, something predatory. Not like a lion's roar or a wolf's howl, but quieter. Patient, the way a predator sounds, when it knows its prey can run, but never escape. I slammed the car door shut just as the first crack of thunder split the sky. Rain followed like a dam breaking, pounding the windshield, deafening in its intensity. I didn't take the main highways. Couldn't risk it. I stuck to narrow back roads, winding through black trees and abandoned gas stations. My heart pounded as hard as the rain, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. In the inner pocket of my jacket, I could feel the weight of what I'd taken. The stolen documents weren't just paper or data, they were radioactive. They burned against my chest with every turn of the wheel, a reminder that I hadn't just seen something terrible, I'd taken it with me. I thought I was safe. Thought I'd made it out. As soon as I reached a small town with public internet access. Uploaded everything to an offshore server in Iceland. Every document, every audio clip, every photo I'd taken, every note I'd scribbled down in the dark, trying not to hyperventilate. I encrypted it all with the kind of security usually reserved for military intelligence. I wasn't taking chances. But it didn't matter. 6 hours later, every single file was gone. Corrupted or deleted, no trace. The backups I sent across multiple anonymous networks, dead, like the data never existed. When I got back to my apartment, the front door was closed, locked. Nothing looked out of place. But inside, it was clear. Someone had been there. My laptop, gone. My phone, destroyed. Backup drives, smashed. Even the cheap digital camera I'd stuffed in a sock drawer missing. Nothing stolen. Nothing except the truth. I reached out to journalists. No response. Even the independent sites that usually pounced on conspiracy stories ghosted me. Forums where people had posted about the Grove before. Every post vanished within minutes. Threads closed. Accounts banned. It wasn't just censorship, it was like the internet had never heard of what I saw. Like it had been erased, not just from servers, but from memory. That's when the dream started. Every night since, I've seen things that don't belong in this world. Tentacled shadows coiled around cities, eyes bigger than skyscrapers watching from beyond the stars. They exist in the cracks between dimensions. They feed on despair. They don't scream. They whisper. They show me what's coming. Drowned cities. Skies full of wind that screams like a chorus of the damned. People reduced to livestock, obedient. Broken, hopeless. They show me this future like it's already written. And they whisper that I'm not some hero. Not a whistleblower or survivor. I'm their messenger. They chose me. Not to fight them. Not to expose them. But to spread them. Every word I speak, every person I warn, it's all part of their design. Resistance gives people hope. They don't want resistance. They want despair. That's their real weapon. Hopelessness. Helplessness. The slow rot of faith in anything human. I'm writing this from a motel room in Reno. I haven't stayed anywhere longer than a few hours. I drive at night. Sleep during the day, if at all. But I know it's pointless. They're not hunting me. They don't need to. I'm already doing their work just by remembering. Just by carrying what I saw inside me that night in the Grove. It wasn't just a ceremony. It was a ritual, a transformation. They weren't trying to hide what they were doing. They were recruiting. And I wasn't an intruder. I was an initiate. Tonight I'll head east. Into the desert. Maybe I'll find a way to break the cycle. Or maybe I'll vanish, like the others who tried to speak before me. Maybe that's the best outcome. Let the truth die with me. Burn it out. Take it with me into the sand and the silence. But if you're reading this, if these words have somehow survived the censors, the scrubbing, the edits, then hear me. They call it the cremation of care. But what they burn isn't just worry. They burn conscience. And when the flames die, the world grows colder, meaner, more hollow, more ready for them. The fire in the Grove never really goes out. It spreads, slowly, quietly, like a sickness. A darkness that eats everything human. Until there's nothing left but shadows. And in those shadows, Something very old and very hungry is waiting to be born. Tonight, I'll take you on another journey. One that reaches deep into one of the cold. War's most chilling and unsolved mysteries. Picture this. It's 1959, a bitter winter night in the Ural Mountains. A group of young hikers, strong, smart, and full of life, huddled together inside a tent pitched on the side of a peak known to locals as Dead Mountain. They're laughing, scribbling notes in their journals under the dim light of a flashlight. They have no idea they're living their final hours. No idea that this mountain will become their tomb. No idea that their deaths will ignite a mystery that burns hotter, colder, and stranger with every passing decade. This is the real story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, and once you hear it, you won't sleep quite the same again. For decades, I've been haunted by one story in particular, a story that's as fascinating as it is terrifying. My name is James, and for the last several weeks, I've buried myself in dusty case files, faded photographs, fragile diaries, and forgotten witness reports, trying to understand what really happened to those 9 young hikers in 1959. The deeper I dig, the more the Dyatlov Pass incident begins to feel like something pulled straight from a nightmare, straddling that eerie line between documented fact and impossible fiction. Let's go through it together, carefully, as if we're reopening a cold case that's been sealed for over 60 years. It all began in late January 1959. 10 experienced ski hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute in the Soviet Union set out on a challenging expedition. Their destination, Otorten, a remote peak in the northern Ural Mountains. The group, mostly in their early 20s, 7 men and 2 women, were all seasoned hikers. The exception was one older member, a war veteran and instructor, who joined them for guidance. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student known for his discipline and determination. On January 23rd, the team received their official route paperwork and boarded a train in Sverdlovsk, modern-day Yekaterinburg. I try to picture them on that train laughing, leaning out the windows, maybe one of them strumming the mandolin they'd brought along. Full of youth, courage, and maybe just enough naivety to think they were invincible. After 2 long days on the rails, they arrived in Ivdel, a remote town at the edge of the northern Urals. Ivdel also housed a Soviet gulag for political prisoners and hardened criminals, something that must have added an extra chill to the air, even for experienced trekkers. From there, they took a bus deeper into the wilderness, then hitched a ride in the back of a woodcutter's truck to reach the last inhabited village on their route, Vitsai. The people there must have watched these university students with a mix of admiration and unease. The path they planned to take was rated as Category 3, the highest level of difficulty, and they were attempting it in February, one of the harshest months in that region. On January 27th, the Dyatlov group left Vitsai and trekked into the snow-covered forest. But only a day later, one of them had to turn back. Yuri Yudin had been suffering from chronic joint pain and rheumatism, made worse by the frigid conditions. On January 28th, he made the difficult decision to return to Vitsai. He hugged his friends goodbye, unaware that he would be the last person to ever see them alive. By saving himself, he had unknowingly condemned himself to a lifetime of survivor's guilt. The remaining 9 pressed on into the wilderness. Thanks to the diaries and camera film recovered later, investigators were able to piece together their route. By January 31st, the group had reached the edge of a highland area. There, they stored extra food and supplies in a cache in a wooded valley, meant to lighten their load and serve as a stockpile for the return trip. They were in high spirits. They joked in their diary entries, took cheerful photographs, and even created a mock newspaper called the Evening Otorten. One humorous entry read, "From now on, we know that the snowmen exist," a tongue-in-cheek nod to the local legends about yetis and forest spirits. Despite the fatigue and cold, there was a warmth among them, a camaraderie that glowed through the pages of their journals. On February 1st, they began crossing a mountain pass that, after their deaths, would come to bear Dyatlov's name. Their plan was to camp on the far side of the pass that night. But then, the weather turned violent. A blizzard swept across the mountains. Visibility dropped to near zero as howling winds and snow pounded them. Disoriented, the group veered off course westward away from the safety of the valley and toward the exposed eastern slope of a mountain known as Kholat Syakl in the language of the local Mansi people. That name means dead mountain. By the time they realized they'd gone off track, it was too late in the day to backtrack. The light was fading fast, they were exhausted, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Here, Igor Dyatlov made a controversial decision. Instead of retreating 1.5 kilometers down into the tree line for shelter, he chose to pitch their tent right there on the slope, exposed to the storm. Maybe he didn't want to lose the elevation they'd worked hard to gain. Maybe he wanted to show that his group could endure the worst the mountains had to offer. Maybe he simply thought it would pass. They carved into the snowy slope to make a flat base, then set up their large canvas tent. 9 people packed inside, protected from the wind but not the cold. That night, February 1st, 1959, would be their last. Forensic analysis of their stomach contents suggests they had dinner around 6 o'clock or 7 p.m. They likely huddled together for warmth, laughed at inside jokes, wrote a few last entries in their diaries. In one of the final photos developed from their recovered camera, the group is smiling, half covered in snow, as they prepare camp in the fading light. The wind is howling in the background, the kind that slices through layers of clothing like knives. Despite the brutal weather, they still looked hopeful, still looked alive. But something happened that night. And by morning, the slope would be silent. Their footprints would tell part of the story, their bodies another. But the truth? The truth remains buried in snow, in mystery, and in the strange, silent shadows of Dead Mountain. They were in good spirits that evening, laughing, writing in their journals, chatting softly as the wind howled beyond the canvas. Tired but content, the 9 hikers settled into their tent, unaware that this would be their final night alive. Whatever happened in the early hours of February 2nd, 1959, shattered that peace completely. We don't have any eyewitnesses, just what was left behind. But what we do have feels like the eerie beginning of a horror film. Sometime after midnight, the fabric of the tent was torn open from the inside. Not unzipped, slashed. The campers, some asleep, others possibly just resting, bolted into the snow-covered darkness. They left behind nearly everything. Boots, heavy coats, hats, gloves, sleeping bags, even their axes. The kind of gear no one would abandon unless they absolutely had to. It was around minus 30 degrees Celsius, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Not a night to be outdoors without serious protection, and yet something forced them out half-dressed, barefoot into a freezing, pitch-black blizzard. What could do that? What terror could override every survival instinct they had trained? That's the question that has haunted investigators for over 60 years. When the hikers failed to return to Vizhai by February 12th, no one panicked at first. Delays were common. A few days off schedule in the Urals wasn't unusual. But the days stretched on. The families grew uneasy. By February 20th, that unease turned to fear, and they demanded action. The Ural Polytechnic Institute responded quickly, sending student volunteers to retrace the group's path. The Soviet army soon followed, along with local police and militia. Helicopters combed the wilderness from the air. Ground teams pushed through deep snow and brutal cold, calling out names that never echoed back. Among those searching was a student named Mikhail Sharavin. On February 26th, he made a discovery that would change the course of the investigation. He and his team were moving along the slope of Kholat Syakl when he noticed something strange, a piece of canvas poking through the snow. As they dug closer, It became clear. It was the group's tent, collapsed and half-buried. Sheridan used an ice axe to hack away at the snow blocking the entrance. When he pulled it back, the sight inside made his stomach drop. The tent had clearly been slashed open. From the inside. Not clawed or ripped by an animal cut, with purpose. Despite being snow-filled and battered, nearly all the hikers' belongings remained inside, neatly arranged. Blankets and jackets laid out. A row of boots lined along one side. Flashlights. A map, a handful of rubles. A small pile of official documents. Even a flask of vodka. In one corner sat a tin plate, topped with slices of salted pork fat. Someone had been mid-snack when everything stopped. It was surreal, like a moment frozen in time. The inside of the tent felt undisturbed, almost peaceful. Not at all like the scene of chaos you'd expect if something had broken in. Sheridan would later say it was as if the hikers had been interrupted during dinner and fled in panic. But what could cause trained mountaineers to cut open their only shelter and run? Outside the tent, the snow held more disturbing clues, footprints. 9 sets, each matching a member of the group. Some wore only socks, one had on just a single shoe, others bare feet. You could still make out individual toe impressions in the crusted snow. But strangest of all, the prints weren't scattered in panic. There was no sign of a chaotic dash or flailing. The hikers had walked quickly, yes, but in a deliberate, almost orderly fashion. A straight line heading down the slope toward the forest. The rescuers followed the trail for nearly 500 meters before fresh snow swallowed it up. It was as if the group had chosen to head for the tree line, perhaps hoping to find cover or regroup. The search team stood silently at the edge of that trail, snow crunching softly beneath them, wind cutting through their thick jackets. None of them could make sense of it. Why would 9 experienced hikers calmly abandon their tent in sub-zero weather, wearing almost nothing, and walk into the woods? With nightfall creeping in, they were forced to stop the search for the day. But none of them slept well that night. The scene had left them shaken. Not just confused, unsettled, in a way they couldn't quite name. The next morning, they pushed toward the edge of the dense forest below, hoping to find answers, or at least the rest of the group, beneath the skeletal limbs of a tall cedar tree. Sheridan and the other searchers came upon a small patch of blackened snow, remnants of a fire. Charred sticks jutted out like ribs, and near the fire, half buried in snow, were the first 2 bodies. The scene didn't make sense. Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivanashenko lay side by side, lifeless in the frozen white. Neither had shoes. Both were stripped down to their underwear, their exposed limbs twisted unnaturally. Skin flushed a deep reddish-brown from frostbite. Above them, the cedar's lower branches had been violently broken up to 5 meters high. It looked like someone had scrambled up the tree in desperation. Sheridan noticed bits of torn fabric and bloodied skin stuck to the bark. "Jesus," he muttered, brushing snow off a jagged patch. They tried to climb this, maybe to see the tent in the distance, or to escape something. Whatever it was, they were in a panic. Krivanashenko's body had odd burn marks on his leg and hands. But what chilled the team even more was what they found on his right hand. A piece of flesh had been bitten off the knuckle, not torn bitten, possibly by Krivanashenko himself. Maybe trying to stay conscious, maybe trying to keep from screaming. The fire they'd built had been small stripped. Cedar branches lay snapped and scattered around the area. But it had died out long before the boys had. The mental image was brutal. 2 young men, huddled by a fading fire in their underwear, their only light coming from flames that could not outlast the night. Above them, the sky is suffocating black. Around them, nothing but snow and silence. About 300 meters uphill from the cedar, the searchers found Igor Dyatlov. He was lying on his back in the snow, arms frozen mid-motion. One reached toward the sky, clutching a brittle birch branch. the other pressed to his chest, as if shielding something. People later said he looked like he had been protecting a photo, or maybe a journal. But when they checked, there was nothing, just fabric. His head pointed toward the direction of the tent, as if he'd been crawling back. Igor was better dressed: sweater, flannel shirt, pants. But no coat, no boots, only socks. His eyes were open when they found him. Not frozen in terror, just distant, as if he'd come to terms with something just before the cold stole his breath. A little downhill from Dyatlov was Zaneta Komogorova Zina. She had on more layers: 2 sweaters, 2 pairs of pants, but she too was barefoot, just socks on her feet. Her body was face down in the snow, her arms stretched ahead, elbows bent. It looked like she had been crawling uphill, dragging herself toward the tent. She hadn't made it. Along her right side was a long, vivid bruise, red, raw, about the length of a baton strike. It looked like she'd been hit, but there were no other external wounds, no broken bones, no torn tissue. Just that one cruel mark. What happened out there? It wasn't until March 5th, nearly a week later, that they found the 5th body, Rustem Slobodin. He was lying face down in the snow, about 480 meters from the cedar. Halfway back to the tent, Rustem had been dressed more sensibly. A long-sleeved undershirt, a sweater, 2 pairs of pants, 4 layers of socks, 1 felt-lined boot on his right foot. But his head was bare, and his left foot had only a sock. In his right hand, he was still holding a small, closed pocket knife. His face was frozen, lips slightly parted. He looked like he'd fallen mid-step. An autopsy would later reveal a linear skull fracture about 7 centimeters long, possibly from a fall. But it wasn't fatal. The coroner believed Rustem had kept moving after the injury, possibly for up to an hour. Like the others, he died from hypothermia. No attack, no fatal wounds. Just cold. Inescapable, merciless cold. All 5 of the hikers found so far, Doroshenko, Krivonishenko, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, had died not from any obvious violence, but from exposure. Their injuries ranged from baffling to minor, but all had succumbed to the cold. Rustem's wristwatch was found shattered, the glass face cracked, the hands frozen at 8:45. Whether it was morning or night, no one knew. Whether it stopped that day or days later was also a mystery. That timestamp felt symbolic, like a moment in time had frozen alongside them. Now imagine being Yuri Yudin, the one who had turned back early due to illness. He was called in to identify the bodies of his friends, one by one. Each time the canvas was lifted at the Morgan Ivdel, he had to nod or shake his head. "That's Georgie," he said, choking back tears. Zina ... Yes, that's her. Guilt carved itself into him deeper with every confirmation. He had gotten lucky. A sword joint had saved his life. And now, standing among the living, he had to stare into the faces of the dead and remember the laughter, the jokes, the plans, and wonder what the hell happened to them out there. Their identities were finally confirmed, but 4 members of the Dyatlov group were still missing. Weeks passed with no sign of them. As winter faded and the early spring sun began to melt the heavy snow, hope of finding them alive had already vanished. It wasn't until May, nearly 3 months after the incident, that nature gave up its grim secret. On May 4th, a local Mansi tribesman named Kurin was helping with the search. He had brought his dog along, and as they moved through the woods, the dog suddenly froze and started sniffing frantically near a rocky ravine. This area was about 75 meters further into the forest from the cedar tree, where 2 bodies had been discovered earlier, and roughly 1.5 kilometers from the group's original campsite. Curious, the team began to investigate. Some torn pieces of clothing were spotted caught on a low branch nearby. The snow beneath was oddly sunken. When searchers began digging, what they uncovered was horrifying. The last 4 bodies buried under nearly 4 meters of compacted snow, hidden in a shallow ravine filled with meltwater and ice. The bodies belonged to Ludmila, Luda, Dubanina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Kolevatov. The way they were found only deepened the mystery. Unlike the first victims, 3 of the 4 were dressed more warmly strange, considering the initial group had fled the tent in a state of undress. It looked like they had taken clothing from those who died earlier, likely out of desperate necessity. Lyu Dmila, for instance, was wearing Yuri Krivanashenko's burned and torn brown trousers. One of her feet had been wrapped in a piece of his wool sweater, a crude but understandable attempt at warmth. Zolotaryov, who was 38, was wearing Ludmila's faux fur coat and hat. Kolevatov had added a spare sweater and pants, probably from one of the others. This exchange of clothing painted a grim but very human picture. The survivors had tried to stay alive by using whatever they could from the dead. It was heartbreaking, yet practical, a final effort to cling to life in the deadly cold. But what truly baffled the investigators were the physical conditions of the bodies. 3 of them had suffered horrifying internal injuries that didn't match any logical scenario in that environment. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had a massive skull fracture, not just a crushing blow. The damage spanned nearly 8 inches, as if his skull had been compressed by an enormous force. There was no corresponding damage to the skin, no gash, no external bruising. Ludmila and Semyon had both sustained lethal chest injuries. Ludmila had 10 ribs broken, 5 on each side. Semyon had 5 ribs shattered as well. The pathologist who performed the autopsies remarked that the pressure required to cause such trauma would be comparable to the force of a car accident. It wasn't something a person could inflict with their bare hands, nor something caused by a fall onto snow, especially without external bruising. The bones were crushed, but the skin remained intact. Alexander Kolevatov's cause of death wasn't as obvious. His injuries were less dramatic: a broken nose, a small open wound behind one ear, and a strangely twisted neck. These might suggest he fell or was struck, but nothing indicated a violent attack like the others. Most believe he too died of hypothermia, though possibly after sustaining minor trauma. And then came the details that made this tragedy infamous. All 4 had some form of disturbing damage to the soft tissue of their faces, damage that hadn't been present in the other 5 hikers. Ludmila's injuries were the most horrific. Her tongue was missing. So were her eyes, parts of her lips, and even a small piece of bone from her skull. Semyon was found without his eyeballs. Alexander's eyebrows were completely gone. Rumors began immediately. People whispered about attackers, about torture, about some inhuman force lurking in the wilderness. What kind of person or thing rips out eyes and tongues? But the medical team offered a more rational explanation. The 4 had been found in a stream. Over the course of 3 months, with water flowing around their bodies, soft tissue may have broken down or been consumed by scavengers. Animals often eat exposed areas first: the lips, eyes, and tongue. The skin breaks down quickly in moist conditions, especially with thawing ice and microbial activity. Even Ludmila's missing tongue, though gruesome, didn't necessarily suggest foul play. Her autopsy revealed about 100 grams of blood in her stomach. That meant her heart was likely still beating when the tongue was removed, possibly within moments of death. It could have been ripped or chewed away immediately after she collapsed, while her heart was still pushing blood through her system. Despite these scientific explanations, public imagination latched onto the horror. Tongues and eyes missing, chests crushed without a mark on the skin, a massive skull fracture with no external trauma. These weren't the kinds of things people easily accepted as accidents. And then there was one final, chilling detail. Around Semyon's neck, searchers found a camera. Not one of the cameras accounted for at the tent. This one was different, unrecorded. Undocumented and completely unexpected, that discovery only raised more questions. What was on it? Why did he keep it on him, even in death? And who or what had been worth filming in those final moments? His hand was still clutching a pen. A notepad rested beneath it, as if he'd been trying to write something in his final moments, but the page was blank. Whatever message he intended to leave behind, whatever insight, final thought, or desperate clue had never made it to paper. In 1959, the investigators were stumped. Nothing made sense. As required by protocol, a criminal inquest was opened, especially since several of the deaths involved serious physical trauma. The first theory was grim but logical. Perhaps the local Mansi people, reindeer herders, indigenous to the Ural Mountains, had attacked the hikers, maybe for trespassing on sacred land. But that suspicion didn't hold up under scrutiny. No signs of struggle were found on the bodies. No bruises, no defensive wounds, no evidence of hand-to-hand combat. And most importantly, the only footprints in the snow belonged to the hikers themselves. There were no signs that outsiders had approached their tent or chased them into the woods. In fact, the Mansi had assisted in the search efforts. They had no history of violence toward outsiders, and were well known for their peaceful coexistence with hikers and explorers. The theory was quickly discarded. Next came the possibility of an avalanche. It seemed plausible until they looked closer. The tent hadn't been swept away or crushed. It was still partially standing, partially collapsed, but oddly intact. Inside, belongings were undisturbed. The footprints left behind were clearly visible, not scattered or wiped clean, which wouldn't have been possible if tons of snow had poured down the slope. Something else had driven the group from the tent in a panic. But what? An animal attack was also considered. Yet again, the evidence didn't fit. No large animal tracks were found near the site, and the brutal internal injuries, the crushed ribs, the shattered skull, had none of the telltale claw marks or bite wounds. Whatever harmed them hadn't left any external signs of violence. Eventually, the Soviet authorities arrived at a troubling conclusion. No other people were involved. One of the forensic doctors, baffled by the injuries to Dubinina and Zolotaryov, famously said, "No human could have inflicted this damage. The force required was inhuman." Then came another strange twist, one that gave the tragedy a chilling. Cold War flavor. Some of the hikers' clothing, when tested, revealed abnormal levels of radiation. Specifically, Lyudmila Dubinina's brown sweater and Yuri Krivonishenko's wool pants were found to be radioactive. The Geiger counter readings weren't just high, they were well above normal background radiation. That discovery didn't fit the context of a hiking trip at all. Radiation wasn't something hikers should have been exposed to, and certainly not something anyone would have noticed without special equipment. The only reason it was discovered was because one investigator happened to have access to a Geiger counter and was curious enough to use it. That was all it took to ignite a firestorm of speculation. Had the group stumbled upon a secret weapons test? Had they unknowingly crossed into a contaminated zone? Some even whispered about experimental aircraft, radioactive fallout, or government cover-ups, but as investigators dug deeper, they found less dramatic, though no less tragic, possible explanations. Yuri Krivonishenko had previously worked at the Mayak nuclear facility. In 1957, he helped clean up the aftermath of the Kishtin disaster, one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. It's entirely possible that his clothing had been contaminated during that cleanup, and the particles remained even 2 years later. Similarly, Alexander Kolevatov had studied nuclear physics and worked at a secret research institute in Moscow. Some of his gear might have been exposed to radiation as well. There was no solid evidence linking the radiation to anything that happened during the hike. Still, the presence of radioactive clothing couldn't be ignored, especially not by grieving families desperate for answers. And there were other strange details too. When some of the relatives saw the bodies, they noticed something odd. The skin of the deceased had taken on a deep, unnatural tan. Some even claimed their loved one's hair had turned gray. To the Soviet authorities, there were simple explanations. The tanning was likely the result of prolonged exposure to the sun and freezing wind. It's a phenomenon called natural mummification, common in cold, dry conditions. As for the gray hair, that could have resulted from chemical exposure during embalming or simply stress on the body in its final hours. But to the families, none of that sounded convincing. Tan skin, radioactive clothing, missing eyes and tongues, internal injuries with no external wounds. The theories became darker with each unanswered question. By May 1959, the official investigation was nearing its end. Pressure mounted to close the case. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, was reportedly frustrated and uneasy. Still, he was ordered to file his final report. In it, he wrote that the group had perished as a result of a compelling natural force. That phrase, vague, ambiguous, haunting, was meant to be the final word. It was a catch-all that allowed the case to be closed without admitting confusion or incompetence. But it didn't answer anything. It only invited more questions. No suspects, no causes, no further inquiry. The case was marked secret and locked away in Soviet archives. The Dyatlov Pass itself was declared off-limits for the next 3 years. Officially, it was to prevent future accidents. But many suspected a deeper motive, to keep nosy eyes away from something the government didn't want uncovered. The phrase compelling natural force has lived on in infamy. To many, it sounds less like an explanation and more like a quiet admission. We don't know. We may never know. Imagine being a parent, told only that your child died in terror, under impossible circumstances, and no one could or would say why. Some families never accepted it. Zina Komogarova's mother and Igor Dyatlov's parents all reportedly received quiet warnings from unnamed officials. Hushed words advising them not to dig too deep. For their own good, the families were given a chilling message, direct and final. Officials told them flat out, "You will never know the truth. So stop asking questions." And in that era, if the party or the KGB told you to be quiet, you obeyed. Not out of respect, out of fear. So, the families buried their children without answers, no closure, just grief swallowed in silence. The Dyatlov Pass incident slowly faded into a strange, almost mythic Cold War tale, whispered in the corners of Ural classrooms and among mountaineers over campfires. Then there was Yuri Yudin, the only one who lived, the only one who turned back before the tragedy unfolded. And he carried that burden for the rest of his life. Survivor's guilt doesn't fade, it corrodes. "I should have been there with them," he once said in an interview. "Or none of us should have gone at all." Yuri never believed the official story that his 9 friends died in a natural accident. He said it never sat right in his gut. Something man-made, he'd say. It wasn't the mountain. It was people. Something was done to them. Before his death in 2013, Yuri Yudin became increasingly vocal about what he believed. In public interviews, he stated outright, he thought the authorities knew more than they ever admitted. He believed his friends had been forced from the tent, at gunpoint, murdered by someone, maybe military, maybe something worse. He even suggested that Ludmila Dubinina, found with her tongue missing, might have had it cut out deliberately. She was the one who always spoke up, Yuri said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. They would have silenced her. First, of course, he had no evidence, just theories. Wounds that never healed. A mind that had spent more than 50 years circling the same few images: snow, blood, silence, and a torn canvas. But Yuri's suspicions, even unproven, are a window into what the Dyatlov Pass does to people. It lingers. It gnaws at you. Once you fall into the mystery, it's hard to climb back out. And now, decades later, here I am, just another investigator trying to make sense of it all. Digging through faded autopsy reports, blurry photographs, yellowed government memos. Sometimes I sit alone, reading old interviews, and I swear I can feel that same cold wind from Dead Mountain blowing across my desk. The same chill they must have felt. The Dyatlov Pass incident has endured precisely because it lives at a crossroads where reality and madness intersect, where the rational runs out and something stranger takes over. Over the years, dozens of theories have surfaced, some backed by science, others sliding into the paranormal or downright conspiratorial. But if we want to understand what really happened, we have to take these theories seriously, each one a possible path through the snowstorm, and we'll walk each of them together. Let's start with the theory that the Russian government eventually settled on an avalanche. For many, it's the most straightforward explanation. Here's how it goes. The hikers were asleep inside their tent, pitched on the slope of Kolatsiakal, when a slab of snow loosened by wind, or the warmth of their stove earlier in the evening suddenly broke loose and slid down onto their shelter. Hear it before they feel it, a low crack, then a thunderous rumble. The tent buckles under the pressure. Panic. In the darkness, they grab a knife and slash their way out because the entrance is buried or jammed. They run barefoot and half-dressed into the brutal cold, thinking the whole mountain might be about to collapse on them. There's no time to suit up, no time to think. Just escape. That theory gained a second wind in 2019, when Russian authorities reopened the case and officially ruled that a slab avalanche was the cause of death. Later that same year, a group of scientists even used computer models to demonstrate that such a snow slab event could plausibly explain the sequence of events. Seen through that lens, the hikers' behavior, cutting open their tent, fleeing in a disorganized panic, no longer seems irrational. In fact, it's exactly what trained, experienced mountaineers might do if they believed their lives were seconds away from being crushed under tons of snow. According to this version of events, the group evacuated with calm urgency. They knew the terrain. They moved toward the tree line, a safer area less likely to be hit by a follow-up slide. But they weren't dressed for the conditions. Not for -30-degree temperatures. And once exposed, hypothermia would have set in fast. Some may have tried to climb trees to spot the tent or gather firewood, explaining the broken branches. Others might have attempted to return. Some probably fell. Others perhaps just gave up. The avalanche theory, in many ways, is comforting. Clean, tragic, but explainable. But it still has holes. And as we go deeper, we'll need to ask, does it explain the crushed ribs and shattered skulls? The high levels of radiation on their clothing? The orange skin and missing eyes? The eerie orbs seen in the sky that night? Theories are only as strong as their ability to explain all the facts. And in this case, the snow isn't the only thing buried. They didn't have time to put on boots, didn't grab their heavy gear. Every second counted. In their minds, a wall of snow was coming, and if they didn't move now, they'd be buried alive. So they ran barefoot, half-dressed, teeth clenched against the bitter wind. Down the slope they went, stumbling and slipping through the snow in only socks and light clothing. Somehow, they made it almost a mile to the edge of the forest. There, surrounded by trees, they regrouped. Shivering, probably confused, maybe. Even injured, but they tried to survive. They managed to light a small fire beneath a large cedar tree. We know because charred wood was found there later, along with their bodies. Not far from that fire, they dug a snow shelter, a sort of makeshift cave to try and shield themselves from the deadly cold. In the ravine where the last 4 bodies were discovered, branches had been carefully laid on the snowy floor, suggesting they were trying to insulate themselves, to stay warm. Or maybe they were trying to hide from something. Hello, listeners of Sleep Theories. Before tonight's story begins, I hope you're having a peaceful day or evening, wherever you are. Whether you're listening in London under the glow of midnight lamps, in New York with the afternoon sun pouring through your window, or in Tokyo as the morning light filters in. I want you to know these stories link us across time zones and continents. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Sleep Theories for more tales that blend mystery, history, and the unknown. Now, settle in. Tonight, we dive into something long buried hidden in Soviet archives for over 6 decades. Classified entry Dr. Alexei Morozov, Soviet Geological Survey, Tunguska Region, Siberia, October 1959. Classification: secret, declassified. 2025, entry number 1, October 12, 1959. Audio. Transcript quality poor due to wind interference. This is Dr. Alexei Morozov. Geological Survey designation 4471. I'm recording this for the scientific record, though I suspect no one will ever hear it. Today is October 12th. I'm approximately 40 kilometers southeast of the Tunguska impact site, and I fear we've made a terrible mistake coming here. But let me start at the beginning. 3 weeks ago, I was summoned to Moscow by the Academy of Sciences, or so I thought. But the meeting wasn't held in the familiar white halls of the Institute. No, it was a gray nondescript government building near Lubyanka Square. And anyone with sense knows what that means. The man who met me wore a crisp Soviet military uniform. Rank, colonel. His posture was textbook. His eyes cold and precise, like a man used to watching others squirm. KGB, no doubt. Dr. Morozov, he said without pleasantries. Your expertise is needed for a matter of national concern. He laid out a series of photographs on a bare metal table between us. High-resolution satellite images far sharper than anything I'd seen before. They showed the Tunguska region from above, but there were strange geometric overlays, unfamiliar radiation markers in bright red. What exactly am I looking at? I asked. The colonel straightened. Colonel Volov, he said. And you're looking at evidence that the 1908 Tunguska explosion was not what we've claimed it was. I leaned in. The images were unsettling. Radiation didn't spread naturally in these shapes. Instead of expected radial patterns from a meteor impact, the gamma readings formed structured geometric layouts, hexagons, massive ones, stretching kilometers beneath the forest floor. Our Cosmos satellites picked this up 3 months ago, Volov continued, and the site is still active. 51 years after the blast. I stared at the timestamps. The radiation pulsed in clean intervals, regular and rhythmic, not natural. Something else. These aren't residuals from an explosion, I said quietly. They're signals, precisely, the colonel said, his lips barely moving. There was no warmth in his voice, no pride, just calculation. Which is why you're going to Tunguska, Dr. Morozov. Under what pretense? You'll be conducting a routine geological survey for the 5-year plan mapping potential mineral deposits. That's your cover. Your real mission is to locate the source of those signals. And if I refuse, Volov didn't blink, then you'll be reassigned to a rock pile in a mine shaft somewhere in Irkutsk, permanently. I didn't argue. I agreed that same afternoon. Now, I sit here, recording this inside a tent pitched in the middle of a forest that doesn't feel right. The trees still lean in unnatural directions, twisted from the blast half a century ago. But it's not just that. There's something else. A tension in the air. Like the forest itself is watching us. This morning, my equipment picked up the first anomaly. Entry number 2. October 13th, 1959. Audio transcript quality moderate. Electronic. Interference present. I spent the entire day taking electromagnetic readings across a grid. Systematically, I moved toward the coordinates matching the 1927 Kulik expedition site. But what I'm seeing now, it doesn't fit any known model. The M readings fluctuate wildly. Spikes of power, then dead silence, then another spike. But it's not random. The pattern is repeating. It's mathematical. Intentional. I don't know what we've uncovered here, but I'm beginning to understand why earlier expeditions never came back with full reports. There's something under this forest dot, and it's still alive. October 15th, 1959. Field notes. Entry 3. We're now well within the blast zone. I marked the epicenter on my map, but even without it, the signs are unmistakable. Every piece of equipment I brought is behaving strangely, like it's reacting to something that shouldn't be there. My magnetometer, Geiger counter, even the portable seismograph, they're all picking up patterns that defy the laws of physics as I understand them. The magnetic field strength should increase gradually if we were approaching something metallic. Underground, but it doesn't. Instead, it pulses every 3 seconds. Pulse, pause, pause, each exactly spaced, like a machine's heartbeat. Mechanical, deliberate, too perfect to be natural. And then there's the radiation. I expected elevated levels if this had been the site of a nuclear explosion, but the readings don't make sense. Instead of a uniform spread, the radiation forms shapes. Precise geometric shapes, perfect hexagons, each one 50 meters wide. I mapped the pattern, a massive honeycomb stretching far beyond the range of my instruments. It's not random. It's designed. Colonel Vulov hasn't said much during the expedition. He stays close but distant, always listening, always watching. What unnerves me is that he carries no scientific tools, just a bulky radio unit in his pack, more advanced than anything I've seen in standard geological kits. Twice a day, at exactly 0600 and 1800 hours, he makes brief, coded transmissions. Back to Moscow. I've tried to decipher them, but the encryption is unlike anything I've encountered. He won't answer questions. The local guides refused to take us past the outer tree line. They warned us in hushed voices, warned about lights moving under the ice at night, and a sound they called iron screaming. When I pressed one of the older guides for more details, he looked at me with hollow eyes and said only, "The sky fell there." But something else rose up. I took it for superstition. Until last night at 0300 hours, I woke to a sound that didn't belong in this world. Not a noise, really, a vibration. Deep, rhythmic. It seemed to rise from the earth itself, shaking through the ground and into my bones. It lasted 3 minutes exactly. Then, silence total and jarring. I wasn't the only one awake. Vulov stood at the edge of the camp, radio in hand, back straight as a statue. "You heard it?" I asked. He nodded. "Did you record it?" I hadn't, and I cursed myself for it, an inexcusable lapse for someone trained in observation. But something about the sound had stunned me, like my mind had rejected it as unreal. "What was that?" I asked. Vulov's face was hard to read in the moonlight, his expression cold, distant. "The reason we're here, Doctor. This morning, several of my instruments were malfunctioning, not damaged, altered. My magnetometer now points to magnetic north, as if it's always at the epicenter, no matter where I turn. The seismograph recorded a continuous pulse all night, identical sine waves, perfect 3-second intervals. That's impossible in stable rock. Something is calling to us. From beneath the permafrost. Audio log, entry 3. Continued. Recording degraded. Heavy static and interference present. We reached the epicenter just after noon. Now I understand why Kulik's earlier expeditions never found a crater. There was no impact. This wasn't something that came from the sky. It came from below. The forest tells its own story. Trees are flattened outward in every direction, forming a perfect radial pattern, but at the very center, something bizarre. A circle about 100 meters wide, where the forest is untouched. Towering pines stand tall, weathered but intact, their bark scorched, yet unbroken. It's like the explosion flowed around them. I took soil samples. The composition isn't consistent with meteor impact. Instead of silicate-rich debris or iron deposits, I found metal fragments embedded in the earth. When I analyzed them, the results chilled me. The isotopic ratios are wrong. Not irregular, impossible. The metals contain isotopes that don't exist in any natural form on Earth. Even more unsettling, these atoms appear to have been manipulated, engineered. Artificial structures at the atomic level. Someone or something made them. While collecting samples, I struck something solid just beneath the frost line. I spent an hour carefully digging it out. What I found defies description. A shard of metal about 15 centimeters long. Jet black, polished like obsidian, but softer to the touch. It reflects no light. None. Looking at it is like staring into a hole in the world. My eyes ache when I try to focus on it. But the worst part is the vibration. It hums softly at precisely 3 hertz. The same interval as the magnetic pulses. Constant. Unchanging. I brought the shard to Vulov. His reaction confirmed everything I've begun to fear. Where exactly did you find this? He asked sharply, snatching it from my hands with his gloves still on. About 2 meters down, I said, startled by his tone. Under the central clearing. His hands tightened on the object. He didn't speak for several moments. You weren't supposed to dig that deep, he muttered under his breath. Then louder, don't touch it again without my permission. The look in his eyes was not one of curiosity or fear. It was something else. Recognition. Like he knew exactly what it was. October 16th, 1959. Evening report, you will mark. The location, Colonel Vulov said flatly, not taking his eyes off the black shard. And you will excavate no further in that area. Is that understood? I hesitated, still staring at the strange metal fragment now resting in his gloved palm. Colonel, this piece might be crucial too. He cut me off with a tone so calm, it chilled me more than if he'd shouted. Your orders are to observe, to report, not to collect. With that, he pulled a lead-lined container from his pack one I hadn't seen before and placed the shard inside. The lid sealed with a soft metallic click. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. But Colonel, this could help us understand what happened here. Dr. Morozov. His expression didn't change. Dr. Morozov is dead, he said quietly. The last scientist who asked too many questions is buried under 2 meters of ice. He looked me in the eye for the first time. I trust you understand my meaning. There was no anger, no menace in his tone, just cold finality. The threat landed slowly, like ice settling in my stomach. I nodded. Yes, sir. That night, while Vulov busied himself with his usual encrypted radio transmission, I slipped away from camp with a portable scanner and returned to the site. I had to see what else was down there. My curiosity, as always, proved stronger than my fear. I took fresh ground-penetrating radar scans, keeping my equipment shielded to avoid detection. What I found shattered everything I knew about geology. The metal object wasn't just a fragment. It was a corner, a single piece of something vast beneath our feet. The scans revealed a geometric network extending deep into the earth, interlocking. Hexagonal chambers and corridors stretching downward in deliberate, impossible precision. Not scattered ore. Not a natural cave system. Architecture. Man didn't build this. No one did, at least, no one now living. The soil samples I took from around the site only deepened the mystery. Radiocarbon dating placed the surrounding material as older than the 1908 explosion by centuries. That event didn't cause this structure to appear. It exposed it. October 17th, 1959. Entry 4, audio log moderate quality. Persistent background hum noted, origin unknown. Tonight, I crossed a line. I waited until Vulov left his tent for his scheduled evening transmission, then slipped inside and picked the lock on his secure case. Inside were pages of classified documents bound in worn folders, some stamped with faded seals of the Soviet Ministry of Defense. I knew it was a betrayal of protocol, one that could end my life. But scientific curiosity, that fatal flaw of mine, overrode my better judgment. What I found inside redefined everything. I believed about the Tunguska event, correspondence, letters, telegrams. The oldest were dated 1908. One was a telegram from Nikola Tesla, the inventor. Another from Arctic explorer Robert Peary. My hands trembled as I read. Tesla had been testing a new system from his Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island. Experimental wireless energy transmission device. According to the documents, his plan was to send energy through the atmosphere to a remote target in the Arctic Circle, where Peary was stationed. A telegram dated June 28, 1908, just 2 days before the Tunguska explosion read, R. Peary. Final test scheduled 0214 GMT June 30th. Expect atmospheric disturbance, Arctic region. Exercise extreme caution. Energy dispersion may exceed projections. And Tesla. The reply from Peary, dated July 2nd, was short but grave. Tesla, your test was successful beyond measure. Sky over Siberia lit like daylight. Effect visible from Greenland. Indigenous populations report violent ground shaking. 800 miles from target. Whatever you activated, it responded. Recommend immediate cessation of experiments. R. Peary. The hairs on my arms stood up as I read. Tesla's private journal entry included in the file something the KGB must have recovered. Through unknown means, the transmission succeeded, but not as intended. The energy beam pierced not just the sky, but the ancient ice. What we mistook as a breakthrough in power delivery was, in truth, a response. Something beneath the ice stirred. We are not the first to touch such power. Only the first to do so blindly. Days later, Wardenclyffe Tower was shut down, officially due to financial problems. Unofficially, the documents tell another story. Soviet surveillance suggested the shutdown was deliberate. Tesla had warned a colleague, some discoveries are too dangerous for the world as it is. I sat in the tent for a long time after reading that. There were more documents. Geological surveys from the 1930s. Soviet researchers had detected the same structures I'm now mapping. They found the same anomalies, but their work was classified. The scientists reassigned or disappeared. The Soviet Union has known about this place for decades. They didn't come here to investigate. They came to contain. And maybe, just maybe, they failed. Tunguska Journal, entry 5 October 19, 1959. The official records claim at least 3 expeditions were dispatched to the Tunguska site since 1945. None ever returned with complete data. 2 teams disappeared without a trace. The third, its leader, Dr. Yuri Petrov, was found frozen stiff inside his tent, clutching his journal. His last entry described something otherworldly. Chambers shaped like perfect hexagons, stretching farther than he could measure. And a sound deep, endless, as if the earth itself was breathing. Now it's our turn. This mission was approved after new satellite images showed something stirring beneath the surface. Radiation patterns, shaped in precise geometric symmetry. I've been tracking those patterns since 1957. They've been getting stronger, more frequent. Whatever's under the permafrost, it's waking up. And every night, without fail, at exactly 3 a.m., it begins. A low, rhythmic vibration hums through the ice. Not loud, but impossible to ignore once you've felt it in your chest. It lasts exactly 3 minutes. Always 3. But tonight, it was different. Louder, stronger, and for the first time I could swear there were patterns in the sound. Repeating intervals, mathematical sequences, prime numbers, Fibonacci spirals. Almost as if it was speaking. Colonel Vulov has been watching me more closely ever since I asked about the metal shard we found last week. A small thing, but impossibly dense, humming with energy. I think he knows I'd been going through his secured files. If anything happens to me, I pray this journal makes it out. Because the world has been told a lie. The explosion in 1908 wasn't a meteor. It wasn't Tesla's wireless energy experiments, though that may have triggered it. No, it was something far older. Something buried under this ice for thousands of years. And we've woken it up. October 20th, 1959 audio quality. Excellent. The silence is worse than the noise. For 3 days, our equipment has been failing. Interference scrambled our radios until even Moscow couldn't reach us. Instruments overloaded, registering values way beyond their limits. And that low vibration? It got longer, deeper, like something just beneath our feet was shifting, stretching. Then, just after dawn today, it all stopped. No more sound. No more radiation. No more interference. Just silence. It doesn't feel like relief. It feels like completion. Like something finished its transmission. Colonel Vulov received new orders in the middle of the night encoded via emergency channel. He didn't say much. Just looked at me and said, "We begin excavation immediately." The new equipment was airdropped under the cover of darkness. State-of-the-art drills and gear far too advanced for a simple geological mission. This wasn't about science anymore. "We're going down," Elev told me, flat and cold. "Colonel," I argued, "I strongly advise against rushing this. We don't know what's beneath us. If we damage it," he cut me off. "Dr. Morzov, you're here to observe, not to advise." Orders came from Moscow. We dig. The drilling began at 0800 hours. At first, it was routine. The permafrost gave way easily. But then, 5 meters down, the drill hit something. Not rock. Not metal. It sang. A hollow, clear tone that echoed through the ice like a bell. By noon, we had exposed the upper surface of something impossible. A structure. A seamless formation made of massive hexagonal plates, each about 2 meters across. They were fitted together with microscopic precision. No gaps, no erosion. The material? Unlike anything I've ever seen. Harder than steel, but translucent in parts. A kind of crystalline lattice. Almost organic. Not grown like a tree. More like a shell. A skin. As we cleared more debris from one of the plates, something else happened. The surface wasn't aged. It wasn't weathered. It looked new, polished, pristine. And as sunlight hit it, lines of light began to pulse beneath its surface. 3-second intervals. The same rhythm as the nightly vibrations. That's when I knew. It's active. It's not a ruin. It's not dormant. It's awake. And it might not be a thing at all, but a form of life. Artificial, yes, but conscious? My instruments began detecting fresh electromagnetic pulses, tight, narrow bursts. But not random. They followed logical sequences. Prime numbers, ratios. The golden mean. It's trying to communicate. Or calculate. Or maybe respond. We don't know what we've uncovered. Not yet. But I believe Dr. Petrov was right. Whatever this is, it's older than civilization. Older than humanity. And now, it knows we're here. Tunguska Journal, entry the 6th of October, 21st, 1959 audio quality. Poor. Voice shows signs of extreme stress. It's trying to talk to us. I told Colonel Vulov during our short break that afternoon. I expected skepticism or a dismissive grunt. Instead, his response chilled me to the bone. "No, Doctor," he said, staring out at the snow-covered expanse. "It's talking to something else. We're just listening in." Later that evening, I went over the data from the day mostly. To keep my hands busy, to avoid thinking too hard about what I'd seen beneath the ice. But that night, I made a discovery that shook me to my core. The electromagnetic patterns we've been recording, every sequence, every interval, they match precisely with signals picked up by the Jodrell Bank Observatory in England. Signals That had been dismissed by mainstream scientists as background, radiation, unimportant, noise, but they've been appearing intermittently since 1908. And they don't come from space. They originate here, from Tunguska, and they're being transmitted outward. At regular intervals, whatever is buried beneath us. It's been sending messages to space for over 50 years. We broke through today. After 2 days of slow, cautious digging, we finally cleared an opening large enough to lower instruments and equipment into the void below. What we found wasn't a tunnel or a cave. It was a chamber vast, still, and impossibly alien. As I descended on rope and harness, ignoring Volov's direct orders to wait for specialists from Moscow, the first thing that hit me was the air. Not stale, not musty, but warm. Several degrees above freezing. And it had a taste metallic, like the tang of blood or old copper. There was something in it that made the hair on my arms rise, like a faint electric charge clinging to the skin. The walls curved away in all directions, disappearing into shadow. Our lights couldn't reach the edges. Everything was covered in that same perfect hexagonal plating we found on the surface. But here, the lights within the plates moved. Patterns pulsed and flowed across them like liquid fire, running in waves around the chamber's circumference. Synchronized, measured, deliberate. It was like standing inside a heartbeat. The deeper I went, the more I felt it, not just with my ears, but with my whole body. A vibration in my bones, a rhythm, 3 pulses per second. Always 3. Then I saw the center. A pillar stood there, about 3 meters tall, forged from the same dark, impossibly dense material as the metal fragment we unearthed earlier. But unlike the shard, this wasn't inert. It pulsed, internally illuminated by a soft glow that throbbed in sync with the vibrations. I approached it slowly, my breath fogging up inside my mask. When I laid my hand on the surface, the world changed. All around me, the chamber lit up, hexagonal panels flaring to life, cascading waves of light running up and down the walls. The crystalline structures I had barely noticed before suddenly stirred, rising from the floor like translucent trees, their surfaces shifting and reforming in real time, like a living equation solving and rewriting itself. The machinery, if you could even call it, that was moving, reconfiguring. It wasn't just functioning. It was evolving, repairing, reactivating. And then, something happened. I felt it. Not a physical push or pull, but a presence. As if something immense, intelligent, and ancient had just opened its eyes. It felt like falling without moving. Like I was no longer alone in my own mind. For a few seconds, I saw through its perspective. No language, no words, just understanding. A consciousness so old and vast it made me feel like an insect. And then it was gone. I staggered back, trembling, breath ragged. Everything Tesla had feared. Everything he accidentally triggered in 1908. It all makes sense now. His wireless energy transmission didn't just light up bulbs across the Atlantic. It followed the Earth's magnetic field, found the path of least resistance, and struck this place, this structure, with exactly the frequency it had been waiting for. That's what triggered the Tunguska blast. The explosion wasn't Tesla's doing, it was this machinery waking up, venting excess energy the only way it could, upward, through rock, through ice, through everything. The result? A blast that flattened over 2,000 square kilometers of forest. When I returned to the surface, shaking and covered in frost, I found Volov in heated conversation over the radio, trying to maintain composure, but clearly rattled. I caught fragments of what he was saying. Yes, sir, it appears to be functional. No, sir, we don't understand its purpose. What do you mean, similar structures? That last phrase hit me like a punch to the chest. Similar structures. How many more of these things are out there? How long have they been buried beneath our feet? The frost bit deep that night as I stood alone, staring out across the endless Siberian tundra. I could feel the earth breathing beneath my boots. The air was sharp, but my thoughts sharper, racing to make sense of what we had uncovered. Then, just as I began to wrap my head around it, the chamber beneath us started transmitting again. But this time, it wasn't the familiar rhythm of regular pulses we'd been recording for weeks. No, these new signals were different. They carried structure, intention. My instruments lit up, interpreting the emissions as modulated communications. The ancient machines below weren't just powering on dot, they were making contact. Entry 7, October 23, 1959. Audio quality, good voice, controlled. Tense, they're coming for me, I said aloud to the recorder, my voice steadier than I felt. Earlier that morning, Colonel Vulov had received direct orders from Moscow: terminate the expedition immediately, return to the capital. But before packing up, he gathered us in the mess tent and delivered a chilling command. All physical evidence must be secured. All personnel debriefed under special protocols. I knew what that meant. Everyone did. Special protocols is KGB code for memory wipes, black bags, and disappearing acts. That same night, a new team arrived under the cover of darkness. They didn't wear insignias. Their uniforms were plain, functional, and pristine. They didn't talk much, and when they did, their accents were off, not Russian, not American, not anything I recognized. They moved like a unit, brought with them strange devices that hummed and clicked, and containers of chemicals labeled in a language I couldn't read. During breakfast, Dr. Mrazov leaned in toward me over a tin cup of black coffee. He spoke calmly, almost too casually. Your contribution to this expedition, he said, will be noted in our final report. The ministry appreciates your work. I frowned. But, he said, chewing his bread slowly, you understand the nature of what we've found. Certain precautions are required, security measures. What kind of measures? The kind that make sure secrets stay buried. That's when I knew I wouldn't be going home, not really. Not as myself. I've hidden this journal and the audio logs in a weatherproof cache, buried about 1 kilometer northeast of our main camp. If I don't make it, if they debrief me the way I think they will, maybe someone will find this. Maybe someone will understand. Before they shut me away, I want to leave a record my truth. Everything I've seen, heard, felt, the structure. Beneath us, it's not human. The materials, the design, the technology, none of it matches anything in our known history. The metals are too light, too strong. The architecture, impossibly precise. Some surfaces bend light in ways I can't explain. Based on geological data, this installation has been buried here for at least 10,000 years. Possibly longer. The machinery, it's some sort of communications array, meant to send and receive signals across unimaginable distances. We thought the repeating pulses were background noise, random static, but they're not. They're a beacon. A lighthouse calling out into the void, and someone or something has finally answered. Here's the part no one wants to admit. In 1908, when Tesla's experiment sent that massive energy surge through the atmosphere, it didn't just trigger lightning. It struck something ancient buried in this frozen earth. The Tunguska explosion wasn't a meteor. It was this alien machine, reactivating after millennia of sleep. It powered up like a generator, roaring to life in one violent burst. The energy signature Tesla released synced perfectly with the device's frequency, like flipping the on switch on a goddamn cosmic radio. But what scares me most isn't the technology. It's the implications. If one of these installations lies beneath the Siberian wilderness, how many more are hidden beneath our feet? In deserts, in mountains, in ocean trenches. Who built them and why? I don't think we're alone in the universe. I don't even think we ever were, since our excavation began. The signals have grown more complex. At first, it was simple math, primes, sequences, golden ratios. But now there are pauses, responses, Dialogues. Questions. Confirmations. Something is talking back. Last night, I saw lights in the sky. Not stars, not planes these moved with. Deliberate precision. Triangular formations pulsing in perfect sync with the beacon's rhythm. They hovered above our camp for nearly an hour, silent and watching. I swear I felt them looking back. Colonel Vulov pretended not to notice, but I saw the way he clutched his radio, whispering hurried Russian back to command. This morning, he pulled me aside. "The mission is complete," he said flatly. "Complete?" I laughed. "We've barely scratched the surface. We confirmed the satellite readings. We documented the anomaly. That was our objective." I looked him in the eye. "And what about the rest of it?" He didn't answer. He just walked away. "They think they can bury this. Like they've buried everything else. But this time, it's different. This time, something is listening. We had uncovered something that had the power to rewrite everything, our understanding of history, of civilization, even of our place in the universe. We couldn't just walk away from this." I stood there, staring across the camp, heart pounding with the weight of it all. I looked at Volkov. "You know we can't just shut this down. What we found here, this changes everything." His expression didn't change, cold, calculating. "Dr. Morozov," he said quietly, "there are forces at work far beyond your scientific curiosity." I could barely believe what I was hearing. "You're talking about burying this? Classifying it out of existence?" He nodded once. "This site will be locked down. Classified at the highest level. It will be monitored permanently. Your work here is done. And if I don't keep my mouth shut?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Then," he said, without blinking, "you'll join the other scientists who asked inconvenient questions." That was it. No yelling, no threats. Just a flat, undeniable fact. Either I played along, or I disappeared. But I couldn't let this vanish into some cold bureaucratic void. Not this, not what we'd found. Entry 8, October 24th, 1959, final entry. Audio quality, whispered, recorded in secret time whispering now. They think I'm asleep. I've locked myself inside the supply tent and tucked the recorder beneath my coat. This afternoon, the debriefing began. They lined us up, one by one, and gave us injections, said it was for Arctic viruses. But I recognized the effects almost immediately. Memory suppression agents. Designed to fog the brain, disrupt speech, make even your own thoughts feel like distant echoes. I'd seen this before in Antarctica. I knew what to do. I forced myself to vomit hard. Most of it came out, though I had to fake drowsiness, pretend. To stumble and nod off like the others. I lay there for hours, unmoving, until they stopped checking on me. Then I slipped out and recovered the cache I buried yesterday, my journal, the recordings, everything. I don't have long. In a few hours, they'll fly me to Moscow for an extended debriefing. I won't survive that. No one does, but before they take me, I need to get this down, what I've seen. What I've discovered. The structure under Tunguska, it's not just a communications array. It's one piece of a larger system. On my last descent, I found deeper tunnels branching out in every direction. I followed one corridor until my flashlight died and my Geiger counter went wild. But before I turned back, I saw something that confirmed my worst suspicion. Electromagnetic markers. Faint, distant echoes of similar installations, other beacons. They're spaced out around the world. A network. Connected by transmission lines buried deep underground, following the Earth's magnetic field like arteries. And this network, it's not human. The architecture, the material composition, even the math, it's alien. Built around physical constants that don't match our star system. Whoever created these structures didn't evolve here. They came from somewhere else. They built this system. Then, at some point, they vanished. But the machines they left behind, they never stopped working. They were asleep. waiting for a signal. And Tesla gave it to them, without even knowing. Back in 1908, his wireless energy experiment sent a surge of power into the ground. That surge hit the Tunguska site directly. The frequency was perfect. The machines woke up. Since then, the beacon has been active, broadcasting, and someone or something has been listening. Those lights I saw in the sky, those weren't auroras or atmospheric tricks. They were scanning, recon. They moved with purpose, responding to the beacon's pulses. The patterns, the geometry, it all lined up. And the signals I've been recording? They're not just communication, they're coordinates, timing data, instructions. Plans. This is no accidental discovery. We've triggered a countdown. We've awakened something that was never meant to be disturbed. And we don't have the tools, the science, or the understanding to contain what we've just invited back. I can hear them outside now. Boots crunching over frozen soil. Voices. They're speaking languages I don't recognize, like whispers. Wrapped in static. They've discovered. I'm missing from the medical tent. If this tape survives, if you're listening to this, know this much. The explosion in 1908 was not the end. It was the beginning. We opened the door. And now, it's unlocking, slowly, relentlessly. Whatever you do, do not dig, do not return. It listens, it remembers. And now it knows where we are. Recording ends. Electromagnetic interference resumes. Soviet State Security Archive. File, Tunguska Black 7. Date, October 30th, 1959. Dr. Alexei Morozov was found deceased in his private quarters at the Lubyanka Medical Facility on the evening of October 29th, 1959. Cause of death. Official. Complications related to severe frostbite sustained during Arctic operations. His belongings were confiscated. His recordings and notes destroyed per standard procedure. All documentation related to the Tunguska expedition is now sealed under Special Protocol 7. Clearance level required. Obsidian or higher. Site status. Military restricted zone. Unauthorized access punishable by death. Posted anonymously to file sharing site. March 15, 2025. Removed by Russian Federation authorities. March 17, 2025. Recovered from a cache of declassified Soviet files leaked during the collapse of internal archives. Preliminary authentication. Genuine. Dr. Morozov's journal was not destroyed. It had been hidden in the permafrost, waiting to be found. Satellite data from 2024 now shows increased activity at the original Tunguska coordinates. Electromagnetic anomalies detected globally. Construction underway. Purpose unknown. The lights have returned to the sky over Siberia. Whatever Tesla awakened in 1908, it's not just awake now. The door is no longer unlocking, it's opening.